This story originates in the homeland of all wizards, the country of Achaea. In the distant past, people lived in this country who had the opportunity to use incredible power. But God deprived the people of Achaea of magic, and now this country has lost its great power and enormous influence. For this reason, Achaea has become a tasty morsel for most of the invaders of this world. Therefore, for a country that could not properly defend itself, the only way to stay afloat was an arranged marriage. The golden-haired teenager slammed the oak door open. The boy shouted loudly to his sister that she could not do this. The teenager was extremely indignant and dissatisfied. The boy was perplexed as to how such a sudden marriage of his older sister was possible. He clenched his fist angrily. This was the second prince of the kingdom of Achaea, Jenner Catathal. The young man who was in that room ordered Jenner to lower his tone and carefully watch the fire in the fireplace. Their sister sat on a wooden chair, bowing her head sadly. The man turned to the boy and said that all walls have ears. This was the first prince of the kingdom of Achaea, Dikvit Katatel. But Jenner did not heed the order of his older brother. The teenager still loudly told his brother that the whole situation was absurd. The worst thing for him was to send his sister to the Radon Empire. The second prince's next words made the princess clutch the hem of her dress with her hands in alarm. The boy noted that they were sending their sister straight into the hands of Kavanok. Prince Jenner angrily asked his brother if he knew what people were saying outside the palace. The younger prince reported rumors that Achaea allegedly sold her princess to foreigners in order to prevent the impending war. Jenner continued that people were whispering that the royal family was handing over the princess to a tyrant who killed dozens of people a day for fun. After these words, the princess tensely called her brother by name. The first princess of the kingdom of Achaea, Yusfir Katatel, gently asked her alarmed younger brother to stop. The younger prince looked at his sister with concern. Yusfir told the boy that he should not blame his older brother, since she herself insisted on her marriage with the emperor of another country. The princess broke eye contact with her younger brother, and added doomedly that it was her and only her decision, so she asked her brother to stop. The second prince, with tears in his eyes, tried to argue with his beloved sister, but she interrupted him, saying that she was completely fine. Jenner wept bitterly. He knelt in front of his sister's chair and looked at her in despair. The boy did not understand why his sister did not resist. The princess did not look at him and reminded him that he must take care of his father and listen to his brother. The second prince lowered his head into his sister's lap, and she immediately stroked his hair. The princess asked her brother to be strong. The first prince watched closely what was happening. The young man briefly and heartfeltly thanked his sister. The future king added that he was grateful to his sister for always protecting Achaea and for what she told her younger brother. He came closer to his sister and leaned his hand on the back of the chair. The princess meekly remained silent in response to her brother's gratitude, but the girl thought doomedly that she was born a princess, so believing that she would be allowed to marry for love was a stupid idea and too naive. Yusfir realized that this marriage to the emperor could save their kingdom from the looming threat from the Radon Empire. It was for this reason that the princess tried to convince herself that she should rejoice at the upcoming marriage, which gives such an opportunity. Yusfir stood in a magnificent wedding dress in front of Emperor Kvanok of Radon at the wedding ceremony in front of the altar, behind which a priest stood and asked if she was ready to take this man as her lawful husband. The princess hesitantly answered in the affirmative to the priest's question. The girl carefully examined the man who stood in front of her, although the veil was a little in the way. Yusfir tried to realize that this man was an emperor. The priest made a solemn speech which corresponded to the traditional ceremony. Having finished, the church minister said that he declared the emperor and princess husband and wife. The man gave permission to the emperor to kiss his wife. The princess stood with her head down, not daring to look at her husband, when she felt the man begin to slowly and carefully lift her veil to expose her face. After the emperor lifted his veil, the princess decided to look fearfully at his lips. The young man whispered quietly for the girl to close her eyes. Yusfir was very embarrassed and closed her eyes. The girl hesitantly reached out to the face of the man who was guiding her, placing his large palm on the back of her head. They kissed briefly. After the kiss, the princess again lowered her head in embarrassment and covered her lips with her fingers. The emperor asked if his legal wife was okay. The young girl made up her mind and looked intently, but still uncertainly, at her legal husband, carefully examining his face. She frowned anxiously at her thoughts. The princess realized with shock that now that they had sealed their marriage with the kiss of an oath, there was no turning back. It was from this moment that the young princess became a married woman. After the wedding, the emperor ordered his wife to be put in a carriage, and he himself mounted a horse and set off on the road to his empire. Many warriors surrounded the emperor, sitting on their horses. The girl sat sadly alone in a large carriage and thought that her husband had caused such a commotion, as if a chase would really begin after them. The princess knew that Kwannon himself founded the Radon Empire. Therefore, she realized that it was not easy for the emperor to leave his brainchild unattended for such a long time. But the young girl was troubled by troubling questions. She asked herself again and again whether Emperor Radon was truly concerned about his empire or his subjects. Yusfir tormented herself with rumors that she had heard about her husband. The girl sadly looked out the window at the forest that they were passing. Yusfir heard many rumors about the emperor. The people around him whispered that he was a tyrant, a monster, a murderer. The princess opened the window and breathed in the fresh air that was filled with the smells of the forest. The girl stuck her face out a little and exposed it to the light and warm breeze. The princess looked at her husband, who was moving on his horse in front of everyone. The girl noted with delight that the emperor was like God himself in the flesh. He was such a handsome and stately man. Yusfir noticed with displeasure that she, stuck in her golden cage, looked unworthy and completely faded compared to her husband. The girl looked at the man's dark, thick hair and realized that compared to him, she was nobody, and also too weak. The homeland of all wizards is Achaea. The princess recalled that once upon a time, the Great Silver Forest, a guardian deity, showed its mercy to the royal family of Katatel. Since then, in each generation of their family, one wizard has awakened. This wizard defended the country with the power he bestowed. This time it was Yusfira who was lucky. The girl lit crumbs of magic on her open palm. In anger, the princess clenched her fist tightly to crush this magic, since it was of no use. They were just worthless crumbs, not magic. The princess doubted that she could cope with her new role. After all, she became not just an empress, but a wife. The young girl was tormented by frightening thoughts that suddenly the emperor's interest in her would suddenly disappear, and what they would do to her. The princess was drowning in anxiety. The princess did not even notice that a man was looking out behind one of the tree posts. This man was wearing a wide robe with a hood, which made it difficult to see him. A ball of darkness swirled in the hands of this unknown man. An inner feeling forced the princess to look there. She was surprised and tried to understand who was in the depths of the forest. The princess did not even have time to feel the impending danger, when an arrow created from magic appeared straight in front of her, moving through the air with its retinue. Everything happened instantly. The emperor, in a hurry, turned his horse towards the carriage and asked his subordinates what had happened. One man announced loudly that it was an arrow. Another subordinate alarmedly reported to his emperor that the carriage was attacked from the forest. Everyone was worried about their empress. Everyone headed towards the entrance to the carriage. The men asked each other if the empress was okay. Meanwhile, the girl was coughing up blood because the arrow hit her right in the heart. She realized in horror what was happening. The princess recalled how she sat with her older brother in the fireplace room. The soft light from the fire illuminated the dark room. Yusfir honestly admitted to her brother that she was scared. The girl was crying and hugging herself, and the young man was sitting next to her. Yusfir whispered doomedly that she did not want to go to the Radon Empire. She told her brother that she did not want to marry this man. The princess looked hopefully at the first prince and asked him if there was really another way out. After all, she was so afraid of what fate and the first prince had in store for her. The first prince looked sadly into the eyes of his younger sister and admitted that it hurt him to see her tears. The man uttered a rhetorical question about what else they could do in the current situation. The whole point was that their country could not resist the empire because they had nothing. No army, no enough money, no necessary territories with which they could buy off Emperor Radon. The man wiped his sister's tears. The first prince added doomedly that if only the guardian had the opportunity to stand up for their kingdom, like in past times. But they both knew that this was impossible, so they were forced to make such sacrifices. The princess, bleeding, thought that her brother was right. After all, if she had true guardian magic, it would be better and easier. The girl cried doomedly, realizing that if she had been at least a little more useful in this situation, this would not have happened. The girl's eyes closed forever. The frowning face relaxed. The princess heard someone calling her with the title of Empress and asking her to wake up. The girl inhaled with a wheeze and opened her eyes, sitting up abruptly on the ground. Yusfir did not understand what was happening because she remembered past events. The girl realized in shock that she had just been hit by an arrow. The loud cry of the emperor, who was calling Yusfira, made the girl turn around sharply. The princess noticed that the man was kneeling in front of the carriage. Emperor Kwana begged his empress to wake up. Immediately the girl looked in horror at her body, which lay lifelessly like a rag in the hands of a strong man. Yusfir did not realize what was happening and how it was possible. The emperor's soldiers turned to their master in confusion and shame, saying that the empress had already died. The men were worried about their emperor's reaction to what had happened and what would follow. The emperor squeezed the dead girl's shoulder angrily and tightly. The man remarked in a growling voice that killing Yusfir was a stupid idea. The man easily lifted the lifeless body of his wife and told his people that he did not trust the dirty northerners for a moment. Kwana was angry. The veins began to play on his chin from how hard the man clenched his jaw. The emperor said that it was not worth agreeing to the ridiculous game of a happy marriage. He began to climb into the carriage. The princess realized in horror that she would follow such a wrath from a young and ruthless emperor with such well-known fame. The emperor's neck veins bulged from tension. He shouted loudly that his marriage with the princess was dissolved. The man did not let go of the girl's body from his hands. He added that Akia would pay for his betrayal with blood. The ghost of Yusfira rushed about, realizing what this threatened her country with. She begged the emperor not to do this. He certainly didn't hear her. Kavana ordered his people to hurry up in order to return to the empire as soon as possible. Yusfira screamed, but to no avail. The picture swam before her eyes. Yusfira bent over, bending her knees. She was in great pain, as if her body was being torn into many pieces. The girl, in horror, squeezed the place where the blood from the wound was visible. She couldn't move. The princess was aware that if she failed, then Akia would come to an end. Unexpectedly, soon after the emperor left, a man appeared there. The man said that Yusfira was poor because her blood had not even dried yet. He bent one knee in front of the pool of blood. The princess saw that it was her brother. It was the first prince of the kingdom of Akia, who touched the warm blood of the young girl and rubbed it on his fingers. The ghost of Yusfira tried to get up from the ground with relief. The girl was exhausted, but happily thought that her brother had come to save her. But suddenly the first prince was joined by an unknown man in a cloak. He asked the prince how he felt as a successor, because he had been thinking through his plan for so long, and now everything was done. The prince replied with a devilish smile that he had finally been able to get rid of the headache in the form of his younger sister. He happily noted that it was an indescribable feeling. The words of the elder brother greatly shocked the ghost of the young princess. She didn't understand how he could call her a headache. The prince stood up and walked towards the man in the cloak. The man expressed regret that he had the opportunity to identify the body. The unknown hooded man touched his heart and told the prince not to worry, because he was convinced that he had entered the very heart of the princess. Yusfira stared in shock at her brother and the magician, unknown until that day. The girl realized what this whole situation meant thanks to the conversation she overheard. The prince angrily pointed his finger at the stranger and told him not to forget about another part of the deal, because he approved the murder of Yusfir only because the magician promised to give him power, thanks to which the prince could overthrow Emperor Radon. The magician smiled contentedly and asked the prince not to worry, because their agreement was in force. The man promised that Akia would win in the war that would soon shake these lands. The magician told the first prince that he would become the ruler of the entire continent, and it was his name that would be sung in all corners of the world. The prince said that he did not expect Kwana to take Yusfir's body. He believed that her body could be useful because she was a sorceress. The man passed by the ghost of the princess when he expressed his regrets that they did not get her corpse. The princess asked herself in bewilderment why everything turned out this way. The princess remembered how in the past her older brother looked at her little with love and carried the girl in his arms. The ghost of the girl remained in the middle of the forest, looking at the ground in bewilderment. She tried to comprehend and understand what had happened. As that magician said, after some time the war began. Yusfira was unable to leave the place where she died. I continued to think. It was real hell on earth. The princess did not understand why the gods punished her. The ghost of the girl watched in horror the military operations on her land and how people died as a result. The gods, leaving her there, forced Yusfira to look at this nightmare day and night. The girl's ghost slowly began to go crazy. After all, the war continued. The first prince, who, under the pretext of the tragic death of a princess at the hands of Emperor Radon, united with one small northern kingdom. Soon, the princess's elder brother began to lose all ground, slowly losing to Emperor Kwanahu over and over again. The girl realized that in the face of war, everything had lost its meaning. Beautiful landscapes of the princess's native country, its forests and rivers. The people whom the princess loved most in the world died. The girl's ghost saw the corpse of her younger brother and old father, who were pierced with swords and arrows. They all died before the girl's eyes, as if someone from above was laughing at Yusfira for not being able to die properly. It was the third year of a brutal war. Prince Dikvit appeared before the emperor's army, shackled in chains. All the emperor's people asked him to kill Dikvit. Dikvit, kneeling before the emperor, defeated and broken, angrily called Kvanak a dirty and worthless slave. The princess's elder brother angrily asked the emperor how he could first deprive him of his family, and now deprive him of his kingdom. Dikvit cursed the emperor. But the emperor did not care much about the words of the defeated first prince. The man with a wry smile told his opponent to curse him. Kvana raised his sword, which flashed in the light of the moon, causing the princess's brother to tremble. The emperor told him that Dikvit was simply referring to the fact that Kwana would find his soul and kill him again. The princess's ghost watched in horror and despair as her husband killed her older brother. This was the last representative of the princess's family. Emperor Kwana ended the war victorious, but stood completely covered in the blood of the people he killed. One of his men asked what would happen next. Kwana replied that the question asked was stupid. The emperor's face was splashed with blood, which was terrifying. He ordered everything to be burned. The ghost of the princess knelt on the ground where her brother was killed. Bloody swords were planted in the scorched earth. The girl doomedly asked if this was what he wanted. After all, he killed her, their father and Jenner. The first prince killed everyone so that it would end like this. The girl laughed hysterically from the realization of the situation. She raised her head doomedly and began to beg the Silver Forest. The princess's ghost asked the Silver Forest to help her. Tears flowed down her cheeks. The princess screamed for the forest to take her soul in return, but only to save Akia. Beads of magic flashed before her. Yusfira cried and screamed in hysterics to be given a chance to change everything. Suddenly, a soft voice called the girl's name, which made her freeze. Bits of magic turned into something more. The voice called her to his children. The princess slowly opened her eyes. She muttered a question whether it was Miss Silver Forest. Suddenly, the girl met in front of her a weakened, frightened father and a small, surprised Jenner, who were bending over in front of her bed. The king weakly but joyfully greeted his daughter. Jenner was beaming with happiness that his older sister had woken up. The girl opened her green eyes wide in surprise. She looked around the room in which she woke up with a question. Yusfira sat up on the bed, and Jenner immediately happily hugged her neck. The girl looked at her father and younger brother, asking how this was possible. Little Yusfira was sitting on the bed with her contented younger brother, who was swinging his short legs. The princess did not believe what was happening. After all, she remembered how she watched as a ghost the death of Jenner and their father. But now they were all alive. The king cleared his throat painfully and asked the doctor if his daughter was okay, if she should be in such a state. The doctor rubbed his neck hesitantly. The man replied that undoubtedly only in the case of true guardians the color of hair and eyes can change naturally, but many years had passed since the last awakening, and he did not know the details. The girl looked at her hands questioningly when she heard about the awakening. She remembered that her magic awakened when she was 10. Yusfira realized that she had gone back in time a whole 10 years ago. Yusfira bowed her head low in disbelief, which greatly worried her younger brother. The girl thought that it was impossible and she had gone crazy. These were just hallucinations. The voice of her younger brother attracted the girl. Jenner told her not to get sick. The boy wanted his sister to be with him always. Always. The words of the little prince touched Yusfira, and she reached out to him with her whole body. The girl touched the cheeks of the surprised boy who was looking at her devotedly. Yusfira realized that she could touch him, which meant the reality of what was happening. The princess lowered her head and hands from the boy's cheeks in shock. Jenner did not understand what was happening to Yusfira. He gently touched her shoulder with a question. The girl shed tears of happiness because Mrs. Silverforest heeded her prayers. Tears fell onto the bedspread. The princess quickly wiped away her tears and hugged her beloved little brother tightly. She was happy that he was alive. This behavior attracted the king's attention, and he turned to the children, watching them. The man approached them and put his hand on his daughter's back. Yusfira promised herself to take advantage of the chance she was given. The princess hugged her younger brother with tears in her eyes, and resolutely promised herself that this time she would be able to protect her family and her country. To implement her plan, the girl needed powerful magic. Yusfir was sitting in front of a clay pot with earth. She was bound to become the strongest guardian in history. Protector of Akia, Silver Forest, the younger sister of Fakar, the goddess of peace, whose body was buried in a forest at the end of the world, where she was able to be reborn as a huge silver tree. It was near this forest that the kingdom of Akia was founded in the past. Lady Silver Forest became his protector deity, and periodically bestowed her blessing on people. The goddess's chosen ones received the title of guardians, as well as recognition of the people and greatness for their service. But that was a long time ago. Suddenly, all the magic in the kingdom disappeared, and with it the protection with which the mistress surrounded the people. Akia, having lost the support of her deity, was on the right path to death. That is why everyone was very happy when magic awakened in the princess. They congratulated the girl and surrounded her with admiration. Everyone around was happy and praised the little princess, until they realized that Yusfir's magic was not capable of anything. The girl tried to do something, but every day everything became clear. All the princess was capable of was talking to plants. Yusfir hoped that her power had not yet fully awakened, but the plants told her that they could communicate with her precisely because the magic had awakened. The plants turned out to be kind and friendly. But unfortunately, the princesses were unable to help Yusfira cope with the reproaches and accusations that she received every day from other people. Yusfira noticed that in her past life, she only watched the fall of her kingdom without doing anything. But the girl decided that now everything would be different. The princess thought that if Lady Silver Forest really fulfilled her wish and sent her to the past, then Yusfir was sure that the lady had endowed her with special power to fulfill her request. The girl used her magic above the ground in the pot, and it flashed with a golden bright light that blinded the princess's eyes. The princess stared in shock at the pot of soil, where the golden sparks of light stopped flashing. There was a small sprout of a plant. Yusfir looked blankly at what she managed to create with the help of magic. She didn't understand how this was possible, that this was all that magic was capable of. The girl realized in horror that the mistress had brought her back to life and gifted her only with this. Yusfir doubted that the lady understood her pleas correctly. The princess certainly admitted that it was better than in her previous life, but with such power, what could she do? The girl stared at her hands. Yusfir understood in horror that she would not be able to stop Kvanak from destroying the kingdom. The girl looked with silent question and surprise at the small sprout of a plant in a pot in front of her. Unexpectedly, her older brother came. His greeting made the girl turn her head sharply towards him. Yusfira cautiously examined her older brother, who was standing at the door. Dikvit explained why he visited his sister. After all, he heard that her power had awakened. The girl compared such a caring and friendly brother in this life, and the cruel Dikvit in a past life, on whose orders she was killed. Yusfir looked at her brother angrily, with the look of a hunted animal. She remembered how he expressed regret that the emperor took her body for himself. Dikvit wanted to touch his younger sister, but the girl abruptly and forcefully threw his hand away. The first prince looked at the girl in disbelief. Yusfir moved away from her brother and apologized, explaining her behavior by saying that she was still not feeling well. The princess told the prince that apparently the magic had somehow affected her body, and she expressed the hope that her brother understood her. The first prince understandingly told his sister that everything was fine, and said that apparently it was really not easy for her now. The prince took the girl by the hands, which horrified her, and wished her a speedy recovery. Now that Yusfir knew about her brother's real motives, every word he said seemed like a pretense to her. Dikvit asked for forgiveness and told his sister that he needed to tell her the bad news. He still held the girl's hands, even though she asked to let go. Yusfir looked at her brother in disbelief. His words about bad news made me forget about the discomfort from touching. The prince reported that she had certainly become a guardian, but many people still could not believe that the Silver Forest had finally blessed their people. Dikvit said it was terrible, But people still doubted that their princess really had magic. Yusfir froze at her brother's words. The princess tried to be indignant, but the first prince interrupted her and said that he did not doubt her in any way. The heir to the throne of the kingdom asked his sister to understand these people. The prince asked the girl that even if her magic had awakened, what should she do if she was unable to use it? The girl tried to object to her brother, but he asked her not to be upset. He said they shouldn't have had such high hopes for her. Yusfir noticed something strange. The prince's expression and words were the same as before, as on the day when she joyfully ran to tell him the news about magic. The girl happily chirped to her brother that she spoke to the flowers in the garden, and they even conveyed their memories to her. She asked if this was her ability and what her brother thought about it. The first prince was busy and did not share his younger sister's delight. The boy told the girl that it was not magic, but just a little trick. He asked her to think about what people would say if they found out that this was all she was capable of. The elder brother's question saddened the little princess. She looked devotedly at her brother with tears in her eyes. Deekit asked her not to tell anyone about her power and promised to protect her. People whispered that the princess could not use her magic, but they believed that she was the new guardian. People said it was not a blessing but a curse. The first prince kept telling his sister that she didn't have to do anything, just be close to her beloved brother. Deekit promised his little sister to take care of everything, but in the end he shot an arrow into her heart. The princess became dizzy and weak from such thoughts. Dikvit began to restlessly ask if she was okay, but she didn't know what to answer. The girl heard the voice of her past self, that she knew that this would happen. The voice asked what Yusfir would do, how she would protect Akia and take revenge. The ghost of the past hugged her and asked what she was even capable of. Yusfir fearfully tried to convince herself that this ghost was just an illusion, but the ghost continued to whisper that the mistress did not choose her. The ghost, pleased with himself, whispered that the lady just wanted Yusfir to go through all this hell again. The girl could not stand this nasty whisper. Yusfir gathered her strength and angrily threw the ghost's whisper away from her. The girl forbade herself to even think about this. The first prince stared questioningly at his sister, who was behaving strangely. Yusfir was breathing heavily after such a difficult fight with her ghost of the past, and was not at all worried that her brother was nearby. The first prince, frightened, asked if his younger sister was okay. The princess, still breathing heavily, replied that she was absolutely fine. The panic attack is almost gone. The girl decisively thought through her plan of action. She wanted to meet the Silver Forest first. After all, even if she didn't want to save Yusfir, the princess would at least know what the hell her mistress wanted from her. The princess began to implement her plan and went to the northern forest, which was at the end of the world. Yusfir was accompanied by 2 warriors who, shouting over the strong winter blizzard, were worried that something would happen to the girl. But the princess assured that everything would be fine. The princess resolutely told the men that she could not return for now. Before traveling to the Silver Forest, Yusfir came to her sick father to get permission to travel there. The girl explained that since she woke up, she thought that going there was the right decision. The father explained to his daughter that only the king has the right to meet with the Silver Forest, but only on the condition that he can see her only once. The king said that Lady Silver Forest is certainly very benevolent, but she has periods when she is like a fierce snowstorm. After all, one day a man visited her to make a wish. The king begged the lady to revive the girl's mother, but she did not heed his request, and the queen died in the arms of her husband. Yusfira remembered this day. Lady Silver Forest told the king that bringing the dead back to life was against the laws of the goddess Fakar. He lost his wife forever, and the cold breath of the northern forest deprived him of his last strength. The man stroked his daughter's cheek and carefully told her that if something happened to her after this trip, he would not be able to cope. The girl asked her father not to worry. She promised to return immediately if something went wrong. The princess told her father that the lady herself had given her her blessing. She hoped that meeting with the lady would help her understand what she should do for her country. The king cleared his throat violently and agreed with his daughter in a hoarse voice. He hoped that the lady would really accept her. The king stood up and handed the girl a necklace with a red stone, asking her to take it with her. The girl accepted her father's gift in shock. It was an artifact that gave its owner warmth. The man explained that it was a creation of the dwarves. The man remembered his wife Rosanna because a long time ago he bought it just for her. The king expressed the hope that the necklace would help their daughter. The girl reverently held the artifact in her hands. Standing in the embrace of the blizzard, the girl clutched the artifact in her hands. She was delighted to note that thanks to the artifact, her body temperature did not decrease. The girl bowed her knees and closed her eyes. She turned to her father and mother with trepidation. The princess said with pain that she no longer wanted to lose people dear to her. Yusfir remembered the portrait in which there was her beautiful mother, her still healthy and strong father, and her happy little one. The girl was ready to change her destiny for the sake of her family. The princess soberly realized that in the current realities she had no other choice. The girl resolutely fell to her knees, which surprised those accompanying her. Yusfir didn't care how much magic she had, because she was still able to use her ability from her past life. That is why the girl turned to the plants that grew in the silver forest. Her eyes flashed green. A circle of golden magic shone around her. The girl asked the plants of this forest to answer. The princess's guards were frightened by what was happening. The girl mentally told the plants that if anyone heard her, then let him answer. After all, she needed to meet with Lady Silver Forest. She begged the plants to let her in. The accompanying men noticed in shock that the snowstorm had stopped. The princess smiled joyfully and told the men that she seemed to be allowed to enter. The little girl looked decisively at the men and ordered them to wait for her there. The princess began to walk deeper into the forest. The further she went, the stronger the cold became felt, and her skin froze because of this. An unknown female voice called the princess by name, which surprised Yusfir, and she froze, trying to find the owner of the voice. The girl saw a large ancient tree in front of her, and realized that in front of her was Lady Silver Forest. The lady asked the girl in a gentle voice what brought her to her in this life. The words of the voice, "in this life," made Yusfir think. The princess thought with shock that she was right after all. After all, when she returned to the past, it was Lady Silver Forest who spoke to her. Yusfir respectfully addressed the guardian of Akia. She asked the lady if she brought Yusfir back to life for the reason that she needed something. The girl asked what she could do for the lady. The princess touched the tree and said that she had given her soul for rebirth, so she wanted to ask the lady for a little more strength, and then everything would be as the Silver Forest wished. A voice called the girl's name. The mistress's words brought the princess into a stupor because the Silver Forest said that apparently Yusfir was mistaken. The guardian of Akia admitted that she had been watching the princess all this time, but she said that she had never heard the princess's pleas. In addition, the lady asked if the girl knew that the Silver Forest could fulfill only one wish of Yusfir, namely to make her the queen of Akia. The princess bowed her head and clenched her fists in shock. She told the lady that she heard her voice when she returned to the past. The girl explained to the keeper that that was why she thought she wanted to entrust her with something. The lady sternly stopped the girl and ordered her to return back to the palace. After all, the princess's body was unable to withstand the cold of the forest. The guardian of Akia noticed that the artifacts would soon be of no use and said that Yusfira was the same as her father. The girl spread her arms and shouted loudly that she didn't care. The princess, in anger, began to shout at her mistress that instead of just watching the war and doing nothing, as in her previous life, she would rather die here. The lady tried to reason with Yusfir. The girl raised her sad eyes and begged the lady for help. The princess fell to her knees in front of the tree and said that she just wanted to protect her people. She had to save Akia. Yusfir did not want to hide behind other people's backs and palace walls. The princess begged the lady to tell her what she could do for Akia. The mistress decided to confess to the girl that Yusfira's magic is so weak, only because the mistress simply does not have much strength to give it to the guardians. The guardian of Akia sadly said that she was to some extent to blame for how difficult Yusfira's past life was. That is why the lady decided to share her life force with the princess. The Silver Forest thought that this princess could really change the future of Akia. The girl stared in shock at the power that the mistress gave her. A voice from the past noticed that Yusfira could not believe her mistress. The lady told the princess that now nothing could stop her, so she could do whatever she wanted. The ghost from the past hugged her again and disgustingly asked what Yusfir could do. The ghost whispered that in the end Yusfir would still suffer and die just like then, but the princess resolutely declared that no longer. The princess shouted loudly that she didn't care whether she was destined to die or not. The girl called on her magic. Yusfira touched the ground and thick green vines began to sprout from her. The vines began to grow upward, growing larger and denser with each passing second. The princess resolutely monitored the results of her magic. The little princess shouted that she was not going to be afraid anymore. She was more determined than ever. The border of the kingdom of Akia was surrounded by a high fence, on which there was always a guard to control the situation. One guard gaped tiredly. His boss immediately came up and slapped him on the head. The head of border security asked if his charge had gone crazy. The chief angrily shouted that they were standing on the border. His subordinate held his head and asked for forgiveness. Suddenly, the head of the guard heard a female voice behind him praising him for his hard work. This made him turn around. The man saw a young girl in front of him and said that he was glad to see Her Highness. This was the mercy of the goddess Fakar in Akia. Before him stood Princess Yusfir Katatel. She was already 20 years old. The princess went for a walk with the chief of the guard and talked. The man told her that the number of victims had decreased markedly since she personally began strengthening their borders. The girl sheepishly replied that she was glad that she could help them with something, but the head of the guard assured her that she did more than just help. After all, the princess wrapped the barricades with thorny vines, which prevented people from foreign lands from climbing them. The man also enthusiastically remembered the arrows that the princess made for them, and the almost impenetrable shields. The head of the guard said that his words may sound ridiculous, but sometimes he feels as if he and she went through a war together. The words of the head of the guard pleasantly surprised Her Highness. She thoughtfully looked away from his face, remembering. The girl managed to surprise the man. After all, she told him that he was much more insightful than he seemed at first glance. 10 years have passed since Yusfir returned to the past after her death. She spent a lot of time in the library studying books and scrolls. The meeting with the mistress then greatly changed the girl, and now she could freely use strong magic, which allowed her to grow plants in a couple of moments. The girl believed that it was necessary to build barriers around the border zone and surround it with impenetrable forests. She wondered if she could create arrows using magic. The princess was tormented by lack of sleep. She studied almost all the time because she was not allowed to slow down. News of the conquests of Emperor Kwana and his rapidly growing empire very quickly reached the princess in this life. The princess sadly realized that the emperor would soon reach Akia. Yusfir thought that she could strengthen her military power as much as she wanted, but they were not able to resist Kvanak and the Radon Empire. The princess frowned at her thoughts and clutched the paper tightly in her hands. She decided that Akia would not fall under any circumstances. She will do anything to protect her country. The conversation between the princess and the chief of the guard was interrupted by a frightened warrior. As he ran, he shouted that he had terrible news, because a letter had arrived. The girl understood everything even before the man said who the letter was from. This letter was from Kvanak Radonsky. The princess knew that she would not stop, even if she had to remarry. The letter from the emperor was short. The man wrote that he needed a princess and nothing more. The royal family's advisors exploded with outrage. The man shouted about how dare the emperor ask for such a thing, because how could they even think of giving the princess into the hands of a barbarian? Yusfira calmly drank tea while sitting in a chair. The girl noticed that in a past life these same men did this without thinking. The princess mockingly thought to herself about the range of emotions she saw on the faces of the men. The advisors still argued among themselves and were indignant. Yusfira thought that the letter from Kvanak was the same as it was then, a slave who became an emperor. The princess thought that perhaps in a past life the emperor had gone through the same path of humiliation and general contempt as she had. Yusfir assumed that this was why the emperor could become such a cold and cruel person. The princess exhaled and lowered her eyes. She decided it was none of her business. The first prince respectfully asked whether the gentlemen were really so confident that their troops could resist the emperor's army. The men tried to stop the prince, but he continued. Dickwith said his heart was against it, but he believed that as a king, he should be impartial. The man said that a true ruler must first think about his people. Yusfir smiled mockingly at the words, about the people. The girl knew that her brother just wanted to send her away. Dickwith turned to Yusfir. He said that she is the guardian of Akia, so she should understand him. The princess smiled sweetly and agreed with her older brother. She added that she herself really wants to marry Kvanak Radonsky. A week later, the eldest prince came to his sister and congratulated her on her wedding. The princess sternly asked her brother what brought him to her. The young man smiled good-naturedly and asked his sister not to be so cruel, because tomorrow she would be leaving them far, far away. The first prince asked his sister why not have a heart-to-heart talk with her beloved brother one last time. The girl turned away from him and said that if he had something to do with her, then he should not hesitate. After the girl's words, the young man threw a necklace with a blue crystal on the table in front of her. The prince wanted the princess to take it for herself. The princess asked her brother in surprise why she needed the necklace. The young man sat down on the chair in front of her and mockingly said that his sister should read more books. The future king said that in the girl's hands was a communication artifact that would allow her to contact him anywhere she was. Diki asked the girl to keep him with her. The prince leaned over to his sister and told her that while she was in the empire, she should find out all the weaknesses of Emperor Kwana and tell him. The princess stared in shock at her relaxed brother. Yusufir asked why Dikvit needs the emperor's weaknesses, because they now have an alliance. The first prince said that the marriage of the princess and the emperor was just a cover, because the Kwanaha Empire was developing very quickly, and Dikvin wanted to use this for his own purposes. The princess stared in horror at her older brother. She asked him to think about what would happen if they were caught. Yusufir shouted that a war might start. The prince looked mockingly at the frightened princess and told her that she was too naive. After all, it was precisely for war that the first prince was preparing at that time. The words about preparations for war made the young girl freeze in fear. She didn't understand how this could happen. The prince said that they would attack Radon as soon as possible. To do this, he enlisted the support of several kingdoms in the north. He had a very powerful ally, and if they prepared, they would trample Kvanak and Radon. The girl squeezed the artifact forcefully. The princess understood what a powerful ally the first prince was talking about. After all, he could not get such magical objects without anyone's help. The princess concluded that the prince had a strong wizard on his side who could create artifacts. Yusufira wondered if it was again the same wizard as in a previous life. The first prince again wanted to start a war. Deekin displeasedly asked his sister why she was silent. The princess realized in horror that if she rejected her brother's offer, he would simply kill her, as in his past life, and it would be the same. Yusufir remembered how much effort she made to change her fate. She didn't understand whether she really couldn't change anything. The girl thought that if she tried, she would be able to prevent all this, but no matter what she did, the future would apparently never change. The first prince looked carefully at the confused princess. He asked if Yusufir really believed that her marriage with the emperor would solve all problems overnight. The young man shook his head in mock disappointment. He said that his sister was poor because she didn't know the whole truth. The prince threw a stack of papers on the table in front of his sister and told her to read them. The man explained that it was a secret document that he brought especially for the princess. The young man contentedly told his sister that the guardians of Akia could not have children, because becoming one of them meant giving all of oneself to the Silver Forest. The princess froze in shock, as if struck by lightning at the words of her older brother. But the prince was pleased with her reaction and continued that therefore she would not be able to use her magic outside of Akia and would never become a mother. The prince said that Yusufir was deprived of such an opportunity from the very moment when Lady Silver Forest chose her. The girl uttered only one word lie in shock. But the prince continued. He assured his sister that this was not a lie. After all, he found this document in the farthest part of the secret library, where only the king can enter. Dikvit stood up from the table and asked his sister to just think about how Kakan would get angry. After all, his wife will not be able to bear him heirs. It is so terrible. The man approached his sister and leaned towards her ear. He mockingly whispered that the emperor would be so furious that he would definitely want to take good revenge on Akia for such meanness. The princess flushed and pushed her older brother away with the force. She angrily ordered him to stop lying. But the man forced her to sit on the chair again and continued to finish her off with his words. Deekin told his sister to think carefully about why there is not a single mention in the history books of at least one descendant of the Guardian. Yusufir did not want to believe. The girl asked herself in horror, what if her brother's words were true? Will she really not be able to prevent the impending war in this life? The emperor swam in a lake not far from the borders of Akia. His subordinate was worried that they would be immediately attacked as soon as they crossed the border. The subordinate held the emperor's things and worriedly told him to just think that murderers, thieves, deserters were hiding in these forests, and their emperor was not even in armor. The emperor told the worried subordinate to stop talking nonsense and rather hand over some clothes. The young man said that he couldn't appear in front of the princess with a layer of sweat and road dust on his skin. The princess stood on the balcony and looked at the courtyard. Her maid was worried that she would catch a cold because it was cold there. Yusfira wanted to get some fresh air. The maid noticed that her highness had turned very pale, and today was the princess's wedding day. Yusfir lowered her head in frustration at these words. The first prince, leaving the princess's chambers the night before, expressed the hope that Yusfir would think everything over carefully. After he left, the frightened princess immediately went to the library and spent the whole night there. She realized that her brother's words were true, because in all history there had not been a single child of a guardian. Children of wizards always inherit the power of at least one of their parents. It is for this reason that when Yusfir first heard that the Empire had entered into a marriage alliance with them, she thought that Kavana simply wanted an heir who would have magic. The girl touched her stomach in annoyance. Unfortunately for her, the guardians were given magic by the Silver Forest. Her brother was right. She, being a keeper, could not have children. The princess was perplexed what to do. After all, Kvanak definitely needs a child. Suddenly, a loud cry echoed through the palace. The cry reported that the ruler of the empire, Radon, had arrived to conclude a marriage alliance. The girl looked out from behind the balcony with interest, which greatly frightened her maid. Emperor Kwana still rode ahead of all his subordinates on a horse, solemnly entering the courtyard of the palace. The girl was amazed to notice that the Emperor of Radon, Kwana of Radon, had already arrived for the wedding. The princess sat tensely in her chambers and thought about what she should do. She understood that the alliance would end the moment the Emperor found out. Was she really unable to stop the war, no matter how hard she tried? The young girl chewed her nails thoughtfully. There was no way she could allow the war to start. She thought that instead of just killing her like in her previous life, Deacon offered to join him. The prince even shared information about the guardians with her in order to definitely win her over to his side. The princess suggested that Deacon believed that she could be of some use. She was his kind of pawn in this game. The girl thought that if she played along with her older brother, she would not be killed. The princess decided that she had to show Kwana that she was a good person. She rubbed her hands tensely because she couldn't rush and let the Emperor find out the secret of the guardians. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, which brought the girl out of her thoughts. Yusfira stared in surprise at her future husband, the Emperor, who was standing at the threshold. The young man looked questioningly at the frightened and confused princess. The girl immediately remembered the rules of etiquette and informed His Imperial Majesty that she was glad to meet him. The Emperor quickly covered the distance between them and tenderly touched his bride's cheek. This gesture greatly surprised the young girl. The Emperor examined the princess's face carefully and with some warmth, without lowering his hands. His Imperial Majesty noticed that their future union did not please the princess, which greatly surprised Yusfir. The girl quickly began to make excuses. She said that she was immensely happy about the upcoming event, but the Emperor mockingly asked the girl not to lie to him, even though it sounds beautiful. The princess assured the Emperor that she was not lying to him. The man tiredly ran his hand through his hair and asked Yusfir not to call him that for a start. Yusfir, confused, asked the Emperor what she should call him. The man replied that he was not very versed in social manners, but he did not like the fact that the girl called him Your Imperial Majesty. The girl stared at Kvanak in bewilderment and objected that he also addressed her by her title. The motives for such behavior of the Emperor were not clear to her. Yusfir tried to remember if Kvanak really communicated with her like that in a past life. The man, hesitatingly, suggested that the princess call each other by name. The princess wanted to object to such a proposal, because they had not even met before the wedding and it was inappropriate, but she did not have time to say a word. The Emperor's velvety voice made her forget about the rules of good manners when he called her by name. The princess was surprised to notice that Kwana never called her by name. She was silent, carefully examining the man. Kwana asked if she knew his name. The girl awkwardly answered him that she, of course, knew the name of the Emperor. To reinforce the veracity of her words, the princess called the Emperor by name and asked for forgiveness. Yusfir looked at her future husband in confusion and did not understand what was happening now. The princess's young maid wept bitterly as she watched her mistress. The princess stood in her wedding attire in front of a large mirror. Her maid noticed that the girl was very beautiful. Yusfir asked her maid Cecilia to stop crying already. Cecilia wiped away the tears on her cheeks with a handkerchief. She told her princess that it was all very sad for her because the princess had to get married like this. Cecilia noticed that Yusfer could have had an elegant and fluffy dress instead of the one she is wearing now. Yusfer looked at herself in the mirror and mentally agreed with the maid, because compared to the previous dress, this dress was unusual. The maid fell to her knees and hugged the princess. Crying, she asked her not to leave. Yusfer embarrassedly asked Cecilia not to cry. Otherwise, people would think that she was going to certain death. Although the princess understood that if she soberly assessed the situation, then she would risk her life every day while in the empire. Kwanna took her country hostage and took her as the future mother of his wizard children. But Yusfer will have to hide the entire time she is there that she will never be able to give him what he wants. The princess put her palm into the emperor's offered hand and thought that they were not a couple. They stood holding hands and looking into each other's eyes in front of the altar, listening to the words of the wedding ceremony. Yusfer noticed to herself that they were more enemies who happened to face each other on the battlefield. The clergyman gave permission to the emperor to kiss his wife. The emperor carefully lifted his wife's veil. Yusfer realized that she had noticed something else in her past life. Kwanna was a very handsome man. She remembered him in a past life, and he looked magnificent, like a god. But her eyes saw him during the war. The princess was no longer afraid. This was not a union of two loving people, only a means to achieve peace. Therefore, she decided that she did not care how the emperor would treat her. Kwanna, meanwhile, moved close to his wife and reached for his lips. Yusfer froze in shock, because the emperor kissed her differently than in her previous life. Kwanna kissed her with interest and fervor, as if this was the most desirable activity for him. The embarrassed girl stopped the man with her hand and he hastily moved away. Kwanna looked into his wife's eyes, stroking the delicate skin of her cheek. The princess realized that now that's it, they are husband and wife. Everyone present at the ceremony watched the couple in surprise. Only the first prince sat with a dissatisfied face. Yusfer tried to catch her breath after the kiss, which touched something inside. The girl thought that now everything would be all right. The emperor squeezed his wife's palm and called her by name. The man was interested in whether Yusfer was okay. The princess watched from afar as the employees packed her chests with things into the carriage. People whispered that they couldn't believe that even the wedding banquet had been cancelled. Yusfer thought about it. It seemed to the girl that in this life they were leaving even earlier than in the last. The princess turned around and looked longingly at the palace in which she grew up, and was now leaving in a hurry. Yusfer touched the artifact and remembered how she had visited her brother before. Deepening said that apparently she finally decided to cooperate with him, and it was the right decision. He stroked his sister's hair and said that she chose Akia. The princess thought that all these words from her brother were not even funny. Suddenly, the princess heard her husband's voice, who noticed her excessive thoughtfulness and the fact that the girl was pale as snow. The princess turned around in fear and greeted His Highness. Yusfer thought that if many years passed and she still failed to give birth to heirs for the emperor, then Kwanna would understand that his wife was barren. The princess understood that in this case everything she had done would go to waste, especially if she did not have time to stop her older brother. The young man looked carefully at the princess from top to bottom and said thoughtfully that everything was exactly as he thought. The emperor turned around decisively and told the princess that he would ride in the carriage with her. The husband's words greatly surprised the girl, and she did not understand why he made such a decision. Kwanna noted that he knows that this is against northern traditions, because the groom should not travel with the bride and all that. But the man said that he was worried about the princess's condition. He knelt near the door to the carriage. The man extended his hand to the girl and said that he would help her get into the carriage comfortably. Yusfer froze at such an attack from the emperor. The man called the girl again and asked if she thought that it was worth hurrying, since the subjects would be very surprised, because they would see the emperor on his knees. The emperor's words brought the girl to her senses. The princess noticed that her husband's behavior was strange, because nothing like this had happened in a previous life. Kwanna carefully studied his wife's reaction. The girl took his hand and carefully climbed into the carriage with the help of the emperor. Yusfer carefully stood up and thought that at the wedding, and now whether she had similar feelings for him in her past life. She didn't know if this was a good sign or a bad one. The escorted carriage moved slowly and carefully along the forest road. The princess thoughtfully examined the birch grove that was visible from the large window of the carriage. The emperor sat nearby. He turned to the girl and said that she still looked sad. Yusfir asked what he meant. The man asked if something hurt her, or maybe the princess was thinking about escaping. He couldn't figure out what it was. The princess indignantly asked what kind of escape could be discussed. Yusfir touched her heart and said that from now on until the end of time, she is the legitimate wife of the emperor and this is her duty. Kvanna smiled ironically. He noticed that the girl was very devoted. The emperor asked if all princesses were like this. The man displeasedly asked the girl that apparently kissing a man who is disgusting to the princess is also part of her duty. The princess froze in surprise looking at the man. The girl asked what happened to him. Yusfir noticed that the emperor spoke as if he thought that she hated him. The man touched the bridge of his nose as if he suddenly had a migraine. He told the princess that from the first meeting he wanted to ask one question. The girl looked at her husband with interest. Kvanna made up his mind and asked the girl what kind of person she thought he was. The princess did not expect such a question and clutched the hem of her dress in her hands. Yusfir said that she thought the emperor was definitely a hero. The girl broke eye contact with the emperor and continued that she had heard a lot about him, not only about his origins, but also about the achievements of Kvanna. The emperor waved away the girl's words in irritation. He said that he did not need Princess Akia's memorized answers. The man repeated his question. The emperor restored eye contact with the princess and asked if he too was a hero to her. Yusfir was perplexed. The princess remembered the emperor's face covered in blood after he killed her elder brother. The girl looked at the man with some fear. The emperor sadly noted that it seemed his wife was unable to overcome her fear of her legal husband. He noticed that the princess still thought like a dead woman. The man's words deeply touched something inside the princess. Yusfir bowed her head and retreated into herself, and the emperor turned away from her to the window. The man said thoughtfully that he fully expected this. The princess was horrified by his last words. The girl wondered if he really wanted to end the marriage. Yusfir abruptly jumped to her feet, which frightened the man, and quickly rattled off that it was all a misunderstanding and it wasn't about him. The emperor looked at the risky girl with fear in his eyes and asked what she was doing. He immediately ordered her to sit down, because it was dangerous. Immediately after the man's words, something scared the horse that was pulling their carriage, and it reared up. The carriage stopped abruptly. The princess did not expect an abrupt stop and could not maintain her balance and began to fall awkwardly backwards. Yusfir was already ready for a hard fall and closed her eyes tightly when she heard her husband's voice. The emperor managed to catch the girl and hold her near him, holding her head on his chest. Yusfir opened her eyes in disbelief and felt that she was okay. The girl touched the man's chest and hesitantly raised her eyes to his face. The emperor hesitatingly asked if Yusfir was injured. They were embarrassed by such closeness. Yusfir sharply lowered her head in fear and fell silent. She exhaled heavily and tensely. The emperor noticed drastic changes in his wife and tried to find out if everything was okay, but the princess did not answer. The man touched her face with his palm, gently trying to lift her head and look into her eyes. It was at this moment that one of the accompanying soldiers loudly asked if the emperor and his wife were okay, which greatly embarrassed the emperor. The emperor looked away from the quiet princess and looked at his subordinate. He asked what happened. The subordinate bowed respectfully and asked for forgiveness, because the tree suddenly fell and the horse got scared. He promised that the soldiers would immediately remove the tree. The news about the tree tensed the emperor. He said he was sure it hadn't been there before. But the man did not have time to continue his thought and interrupted the conversation with his subordinate. His attention was again completely given to the princess. Kvanna tried to draw the girl's attention to himself, but she looked down and trembled very much. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and shrank all over, as if she was in pain. The Guardian's magic belongs to the Silver Forest, so they cannot use it outside of Akia. That's what Dickwit told his younger sister. Yusfir hoped to the last that the first prince deliberately lied to her in order to intimidate her. But the princess realized with horror that the Guardian's magic was indeed disappearing with every meter that they covered towards the borders. The princess leaned her head on her husband's shoulder in panic and stared out the window. She understood that in this state she would not be able to do anything if they were attacked. The ghost of the past again appeared to Yusfir. The ghost began to ask if the princess thought that it was her brother who stopped the carriage, knowing what would happen to her. Yusfir bent her back more and more, as if under a weight. The ghost mockingly whispered that Kakan had planned from the very beginning to kill his sister and start a war under this pretext. Yusfir weakly ordered the ghost to shut up. But the ghost mocked her, calling her poor. The ghost said that Yusfir would die again, unable to influence anything, all alone. Yusfir covered her ears forcefully, wanting not to hear the ghost's mockery. She cried bitterly and repeated over and over again for him to shut up. The emperor softly called the princess by name and carefully extended his hand to her. The man put the sobbing girl on his lap and hugged her, pressing her cheek to his chest. He began to stroke her hair soothingly. The emperor asked Yusfir to take a deep breath in a quiet and calm voice. He told her that everything was fine and nothing had happened. The princess cried on her husband's shoulder. She was afraid and in pain. The emperor asked if she heard his words. Kvanna said that no one would dare to harm her and stroke the girl. The princess gradually came to her senses. She stopped crying and squeezing her husband's clothes tightly. Night fell and they arrived at the port. The girl awkwardly straightened her hair. The emperor apologized to her. Yusfir asked him the reason for the apology. The man said that he behaved very rudely towards the girl. The emperor did not look at his wife and had difficulty admitting to her that it simply seemed to him that he was disgusting to her. The man clenched tightly the fist that lay on his thigh. He admitted that he knew very well that a woman like the princess would not like the whole idea of a sudden wedding. The emperor turned to the princess and resolutely declared to her face that she should know that she could consider him a hero or something else, but he would not dissolve their marriage. The man's next words made the girl look at him with hope and a grain of happiness. The emperor said that the peace agreement between their countries should remain in force. The emperor was even a little embarrassed. His cheeks turned red. Kakan said that the princess need not be afraid of him, or at least not so much. The princess could not fully believe her husband's words. Yusfir seemed to realize now what kind of feeling she had towards Kakan. The girl correctly noted that in a past life they never managed to talk in private, and only today did the princess have the opportunity to find out what kind of person the emperor was. They looked at each other in the moonlight that made its way into the carriage. The princess looked away shyly and smiled softly. Yusfir said that the fact that she knows all his exploits and achievements is not a lie. Yusfir thought it was funny, but she read about his journey and accomplishments primarily so that she would know what to watch out for. The princess enthusiastically followed the entire life of the future enemy of her kingdom. Kakan saved people who had suffered for many years from the tyranny of their former emperor, and freed the oppressed slaves. The more the princess learned about the achievements of the young emperor, which she did not even want to hear about in her past life, the stronger one impression was created on her. The princess seriously told her husband that she was not afraid of him, and she did not hate their marriage. Also, the girl thanked her husband for helping her recently. She called him by name, which greatly surprised the man. The princess was embarrassed by his reaction, and awkwardly began to twirl her blonde curl around her finger. She explained her freedom by the fact that he asked to address him by name. The man looked at the girl in confusion and wanted to answer her something, but did not have time. The subordinate called His Majesty. The man turned sharply towards the window. Only then did the princess realize in surprise that they had already arrived at the port. Yusfir turned sharply to her window and looked with wide eyes at what surrounded them. The girl was impressed. The princess looked at the night port with delight and realized that the future had changed. Yusfir turned to her husband again and thought that she had not died in that carriage like then, and the war between Akia and Radon had not yet begun. The girl had the thought that now she just had to deal with her feelings, which had arisen unexpectedly. The princess approached the window and touched it with her palm. She watched the night lights, quietly whispering that everything was fine and would continue to be the same. The unknown man straightened his tie as he walked. He indignantly asked what the hell was His Majesty thinking about. The man muttered to his employee that the emperor had been serenading him all last month about his future wife, and literally ran away from Akia after the wedding. The man asked why Kakan was so itching. The man serving him respectfully informed the Baron that, according to the report, the Imperial carriage was already approaching, having just passed through the forest. The Baron hastily adjusted the cloak he had just put on. He told his clerk that it was time for them to go then. The Baron smiled slyly and said that it was time for them to look at their new empress. The princess admired the port. Apparently the girl had never been there before. The emperor helped his wife get out of the carriage, holding her hand. The girl, raising her head, said that the ships were so big. Her husband told her that it was impossible to reach the empire on an ordinary ship. He asked her to be careful because it was dark, to which the girl answered him that she could see everything perfectly, and asked him not to worry. It was after these words that the princess's shoe slipped on the slippery paving stones. The princess began to fall again, unable to maintain her balance, but the emperor's quick reaction allowed him to support her in time. The girl again slammed her whole body into her husband's strong and muscular body. The emperor hugged the shocked Yusufir tightly. Yusufir moved away awkwardly, but the emperor did not immediately let go of her waist. She said she tripped and thanked her husband. The emperor, taught by experience, hugged his empress by the shoulders and said that now they would walk like this. He also took the girl's hand in his palm, supporting her. The princess awkwardly asked why he was doing this. The emperor replied that her bone might be broken. Yusufir tried to explain to him that she just collided. The baron and his other subordinates stared at the imperial couple in bewilderment. The princess indignantly asked if she looked so fragile. The baron awkwardly attracted his majesty's attention. Only then did the emperor notice his subordinate, Baron Oslin. The princess stared at the baron with interest because apparently it was the same Oslin. The baron apologized to the princess for not introducing himself to her as soon as he approached. The man immediately corrected this mistake. He bowed to the girl and said that he was now at her service. Baron Oslin Baynar was a first-ranking official in the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Radon Empire. The princess recalled that Oslin Baynar's family once languished in poverty, but it was he who was able to return her wealth thanks to his outstanding skills and instincts. Oslin did not pay attention to status and saw their true essence in people, and therefore noticed Kvanak when he was still an ordinary combat slave. It was Oslin Baynar who acted as a strategist and advisor to the future emperor during the revolution, and is now one of the most influential people in the country. The girl watched the baron, who was animatedly telling something to the emperor. When Yusufira was looking for information about Kvanak, all the scrolls mentioned the name of this baron. The princess experienced an amazing feeling. It was like she had met a character from a book. The baron noticed the princess's gaze and asked if he could help her with anything. The princess was embarrassed and waved her hand negatively. The emperor informed his wife that Oslin was a baron, but he was part of Kvanak's close circle and, in addition, rightfully occupies his position in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Kwana believed that they knew each other better. The girl smiled sweetly and charmingly at the baron and introduced herself. The princess said that she was Yusufir Katatel, and now Redonskaya. The emperor succumbed to the charm of his young wife and looked at her without blinking. The baron noticed his emperor's reaction, and awkwardly poked his friend in the shoulder with his finger, and told him not to stand like a pillar, because it was time for them to board. Oslin greeted the new empress. The emperor immediately approached his wife and addressed her by name, asking her to hold on to him. The girl also called him by name and protestingly stated that she was able to walk there herself. The emperor held the princess by the waist and tried to explain to her that she had just almost fallen. Such a sweet exchange between the newlyweds did not go unnoticed among the people nearby. The baron directly asked the question that the emperor and the princess were really so close that they addressed each other by name. The question did not bother the emperor, unlike his wife. The princess awkwardly covered her mouth with her palm and thought ashamedly that in the presence of servants this was really wrong. Yusufir tried to apologize, but the emperor immediately hugged her and asked the baron what the problem was. Kvana didn't understand whether his wife couldn't call him by his first name. The husband's words led the girl into mild hysterics. The baron tried to remind the emperor about etiquette, but the man said with displeasure that Oslin remembered him in time, and he himself only addressed Kvanak by name. The princess tried to apologize. The baron indignantly stated that he addressed the emperor this way only during personal meetings. Kvanak noticed that his friend was justified by etiquette, although the emperor did not think that he gave the baron the right to do whatever he wanted. The princess thought that now one of them would fly into the water. Yusufir thought that as soon as Kavana realized that she was not feeling well, he immediately apologized. The girl remembered that when they got out of the carriage, all the emperor's attention switched to her as soon as she accidentally tripped. The princess decided to act. She loudly shouted her husband's name and continued to argue with the baron. When Yusufir received the required attention, she even hesitated at first, but quickly fell into the role. The princess charmingly pretended to be dizzy. She asked her husband in a languid voice to go on board their ship. It was as if lightning struck the emperor. He asked worriedly about the princess's dizziness. The man immediately found himself next to his wife and hugged her waist. The emperor apologized for allowing Aslan to distract him. The emperor deftly picked up his wife and said that he would take her to her chambers. The princess was in slight shock, misunderstanding, and fear. The baron looked in bewilderment at the betrayed emperor and understood everything. He quietly turned to God. The princess asked Kwannon not to go that far. The servants were in great shock. The entire huge port apparently heard the loud order of the princess. She wanted the emperor to let her go. The married couple arrived in richly furnished chambers inside the ship. The emperor told his wife that if she needed anything, she only needed to report it. The girl was burning with embarrassment and shame. Kvanak asked how Yusfir was feeling because her face was red. The man doubted that she did not have a fever. But something in the room distracted the princess's attention from the shame she had just experienced. The girl was surprised to notice on her large bed a beautiful dress with elaborate trim. The princess immediately approached the clothes she saw along with her husband and asked where they were from in the room. The girl sat down next to the dress and touched it with delight. The man asked if she didn't like the dress. Yusfir assured him that it was beautiful, and she really loved the color. The princess was sad because no one had ever given her such a beautiful dress. Yusfir turned to her husband to find out who gave her such a wonderful gift. The girl wanted to thank this man. Kakan assured the girl that this was not necessary, since it was from him. The man was a little embarrassed. The princess was surprised and embarrassed by such an unexpected gift from the emperor. Yusfir came to her senses and thanked the man, assuring him that she would wear the dress. Kakan cleared his throat in embarrassment and replied that it was nothing, just a house dress. The emperor told the girl that in any case it was late and she should rest. He promised to return as soon as he dealt with urgent matters. The phrase about returning surprised Yusfir, and she immediately clarified this. The emperor leaned towards her and said that it was obvious, since they were now spouses. The man calmly reminded his wife that spouses should live together. Her husband's words made the princess tensely straighten her back. She didn't even think about the fact that they were supposed to sleep in the same bed. Yusfir understood what this meant. From this very day they will live in the same room. But the princess was worried about something else. Did this mean that they would spend their wedding night here? Yusfir looked at the emperor with fear. Of course, this day would come sooner or later, since they are now spouses with all the ensuing aspects. But the princess thought that the first wedding night would take place at least after their arrival in the empire, when no excuses would help her. The girl bowed her head and wondered why the man was in such a hurry. Yusfir asked herself if this man liked her. The girl tensely clutched the fabric of the new dress in her hands on her knees. She asked herself to come to her senses, despite the thoughts in her head. After all, even if he liked her, so what? Yusfir was worried because the sooner the first wedding night came, the sooner it would turn out that she was barren. The emperor noticed his saddened wife. He reached out and grabbed the girl's chin to lift her face. Kakan closed the distance between them. The girl felt his breath on her lips. The man asked the girl to let him explain. He explained at that point that just because they stay in the same room doesn't mean anything will happen between them. He just thought that since they were now spouses, it would be somehow strange for them to live in different ones. After his words, the man removed his hand from the girl's face. The emperor promised his wife that he would not lay a finger on her, so she should not be afraid. Kakan believed that, first of all, the cabin was not the most suitable place for the wedding night. Besides, he wasn't going to sleep with a woman who didn't even want him. He straightened out and turned away from the girl. The emperor assured Yusfir that he would not do anything without her consent and desire, only then, as she herself said. The princess looked confusedly into her husband's eyes and asked why he was doing this, and asked about the heirs. This question made the man smile. He couldn't believe that his wife was worried about something like that from day one. Kakan considered this luck. The man turned to his wife again and touched a lock of her hair, stretching it between his fingers. He told her that they still had nowhere to rush. After all, if she really cared about him or about the heirs, then she should have at least pretended to love him. Kakan continued his monologue with the phrase that even though their marriage is now fictitious, he still hopes that someday they will become a real couple. The princess was amazed and did not know what to answer the emperor. The emperor's huge ship sailed quickly on the calm sea. The wind was blowing towards the empire, which was real luck. The emperor was sitting at his desk in his office, but the man was definitely not busy with work. Something was bothering Kakan. He was gloomy and thoughtful, trying to find a solution to his thoughts. The princess's image flashed before his eyes as she asked with concern about heirs. The man was embarrassed. All of this was more difficult than he could have imagined. It was deep night outside the window. Kavahan nevertheless came to the conclusion that what was happening was even better. He decided that he should leave the past in the past and not remember. The emperor remembered the image of the little princess. The man looked intensely at one point on the table and decided to forget everything, when someone loudly called out to him. Aslan opened the door with a bang. The man angrily asked Kakan why he only now learned that the emperor wanted to help Akia with strengthening the borders. They didn't discuss it. His Majesty was not embarrassed by his friend's anger. He calmly replied that they had taken the guardian of Akia. It was a serious blow to the defense, and he was simply returning the debt. Aslan shouted that he still didn't understand this whole wedding farce. Aslan was indignant that a couple of weeks would be enough to capture their small kingdom, and Kakan could give them some kind of mine or something else. But Aslan did not understand how the emperor instead sent soldiers for some princess. Such statements about his wife angered the emperor. He warned his friend to be careful with his words. For Emperor Raiden, Yusufir was not just some princess. He didn't need anything else if she was nearby. Help with the army is a small thing compared to what the emperor was willing to give for the sake of the princess. Aslan became even more angry. The Baron grumbled about what happened to his friend when he lost his head. Kakan threw the covered papers at him. The emperor asked the Baron not to grumble, as it was stuffy. Aslan was outraged by the accusation of stuffiness. He shouted that it was so cold on the ship that he would soon turn into ice, and asked his friend if he was sick. After some time on board, the princess felt the urge to vomit. The girl wondered why she felt so bad suddenly. She was sitting in her bed. Yusufir was worried whether the reason for her poor health was that she had lost her magic. Having overcome her weakness, the girl slowly began to get out of bed. Yusufir was worried that Kavana would definitely notice that she had lost her strength. Everything before the girl's eyes began to float from a vertical position, but she stubbornly moved towards the door to ask the maid for something and try to cope with it. Yusufir opened the door with difficulty and leaned her shoulder against it. She apologized without looking at her interlocutor and asked him to bring her some medicine. Suddenly the girl saw Kakan in front of her. The man carefully asked if she was unwell. Yusufir tried to run away from the man so that he would not notice her condition, but he held her by the elbow. The girl had a hard time convincing her that she was just dizzy. But Kakan noticed her extreme pallor and shouted to the doctor. The princess bent over from the repeated strong urge to vomit and covered her mouth with her palm. She didn't eat anything, but she still felt sick. Kakan held the girl by the shoulders, and that is why some trouble occurred. The princess vomited and immediately felt some relief as she exhaled. But then the girl realized who was standing in front of her and supporting her. The horror of what was happening made her eyes widen very much. She raised her head in shock and fear at her husband, who was wearing a white shirt. Yusufir didn't know what to do. Kakan, without a shadow of delight, lifted the part of his shirt on which there was a trace of his wife's vomiting. The two stood together and looked at the wet shirt on the emperor's stomach. The princess began to tremble slightly. Kakan exhaled and looked tiredly at the girl. He explained to her that this was precisely why it was worth calling the doctor. With a quick glance at the princess, he immediately noticed with what horror she was looking at him, and trembling more and more. Everything was still swimming before the princess's eyes, and it was difficult to concentrate. She weakly asked the man for forgiveness. Yusufir extended a shaking hand and apologized again, because how dare she do such a thing? The girl didn't know what to do. After all, even then in the Imperial carriage she showed herself to be very sick, and now there's this incident. The girl began to feel a slight chill down her back, and a malicious whisper that the emperor would definitely get angry and realize that he shouldn't have gotten married after all. The ghost of the past whispered contentedly that Yusufira had completely ruined everything. She asked what was wrong with the princess. The ghost circled around and mocked the girl with questions about whether it was really so difficult to please the emperor. He whispered that the princess couldn't even use magic anymore, so Yusufir was very rash. Yusufir immediately told the emperor that she would take responsibility, even regardless of what he decided. Kakan was surprised at the responsibility Yusufir was talking about. After all, according to the man, nothing happened. Yusufir said that his clothes were ruined. The man immediately began to pull his dirty shirt over his head, exposing his torso. When the shirt was already in his hand and his body was naked, Kavana asked Yusfir if everything was okay now. The emperor explained to his wife that soiled clothes could simply be removed and the problem would disappear. He claimed that what happened was not Yusfir's fault. The girl was sitting on the sofa and restlessly answered her husband that because of her, his mood had deteriorated. Kakan approached her, having almost finished putting on a new shirt. He asked her why she got it. The emperor sat down next to his wife and replied that being angry with a person who had become a victim of seasickness was the height of stupidity. The girl asked again if she really had it. Kakan touched the princess's forehead with the back of his hand and replied that everything was exactly like that. Taking this opportunity, Kakan tucked a lock of hair behind the girl's ear and said that it was her first time on the ship, so he should have been more attentive to her. Kakan continued that if you think about it, what happened was the result of his carelessness, so he asked Yusfir to just forget about what happened. The man told his wife that once in his youth he walked near a battlefield, and there was one infuriating guy with him. This guy followed the future emperor around because he wanted to join the revolution. He repeated again and again that he would follow only Kakan for the rest of his life, and was ready to give his life for him. Suddenly, a headless body caught his eye, which greatly shocked him. Consequently, this guy turned his stomach straight onto the back of the future emperor, holding onto his back for his comfort. The incident angered Kakan. Kakan asked the girl if she knew who he was talking about. Yusfir, of course, didn't know and shook her head negatively. The emperor replied that it was Aslan. The image of a young, crying Aslan who was disgusted appeared in his memories. Yusfir looked into the emperor's eyes in surprise. She could not imagine such an important and strong baron that she had seen so recently. Kavahan slammed his fist on the sofa in displeasure and admitted that Aslan hadn't even apologized properly. Aslan even said on the contrary, that it was Kakan who should apologize for showing him this horror. Yusfir exclaimed that this simply cannot be. The girl began to smile because she imagined the picture that her husband told her. She carefully covered her smile with her palm. The princess tried to hold back her laughter, but she failed. Yusfir, through a ringing laugh, admitted to the man that she would never have thought that the baron had such a side. The man admired the laughing girl, who seemed to glow with joy. He cleared his throat awkwardly and said that be that as it may, a lot of time had passed and Aslan no longer remembered it. That is why Kakan expressed his confidence that Yusfir will forget about what happened after a couple of voyages, because these are trifles. The man's words once again during their short acquaintance, made the girl surprised. Yusfir thought it was an amazing comparison, seeing a headless body at a young age and suffering from seasickness. For Kakan, these turned out to be completely equivalent little things. The girl thought what kind of life the emperor had, since such a cruel sight seems to him a trifle. Yusfir was glad that she could recognize the real Kakan of Radonsky and not tremble from the image of a tyrant and despot created by rumors and newspapermen. A man in a medic's robe hurriedly ran along the deck of the ship and groaned. In front of the Imperial chambers, he exhaled tensely and carefully knocked on the door. He asked permission to enter from His Majesty. Kakan only quietly whispered that he had finally appeared, standing behind the back of the sofa. Yusfir was lying on this sofa and hastily stood up when there was a knock. She asked who it was. Kakan, it turns out, nevertheless called a doctor to examine the girl. The man began to call the doctor a petty brute and was angry that he took so long, as if he had something to do. Yusfir tried to calm her husband down, because it was already dawn and the doctor could just sleep. Kakan asked the doctor why he froze at the door and ordered him to enter quickly. The doctor hesitantly bleated that he would apologize for being late, as he was collecting medicine. The emperor strictly ordered him to stop making excuses and quickly examine the empress. The doctor immediately bowed down and said that it was an honor for him to meet the empress. Yusfir stared in surprise at the doctor, who entered and did not answer him. The guy introduced himself as the chief physician of the Imperial Palace, Simon. Simon turned out to be a very young man, with large round glasses, red hair, and many freckles. Yusfir thought that he was just a child. Simon called the empress incomprehensibly, because she never responded to his greeting and he was embarrassed. He stood at the door, tightly clutching a suitcase with medicine. Yusfir immediately came to her senses when she was addressed again. The girl looked at the young doctor. The princess immediately smiled sweetly and said that she was Yusfir Katatel of Radon and that she was pleased to meet him. The girl thanked the doctor for coming so early. Simon shyly scratched his cheek with his finger and muttered that it was nothing. Kavana towered over Yusfir like a thundercloud. He menacingly asked Simon when he would begin the examination, because at first the Empress, suffering from pain, had to wait 100 years, and now he just stands there and does nothing. The doctor immediately trembled with fear of his emperor. Yusfira asked Kvanak not to put so much pressure on Simon because she was fine. Kwana said as he snapped that Simon would say whether she was okay or not. The emperor ordered Simon to stop pretending to be a statue and get to work. Simon jumped up to the Empress like lightning. The doctor was measuring Yusfira's pulse when she noticed that he was shaking with fear of the emperor. The Empress placed her hand comfortingly on Simon's and asked how old he was. Simon said that he will turn 18 this year. Yusfir noticed that he and her younger brother were almost the same age. She said that he is so young and already working in the palace, which shows that he is a real genius. Simon was embarrassed and muttered that it was nothing like that. Yusfir immediately turned to the dissatisfied Kvanak and asked why Simon thought so, because the emperor himself would not have appointed an ignorant person to such an important position. The Empress used feminine charms and asked Kvanak if she was right about this. The emperor fell for his wife's charm and embarrassedly muttered that despite Simon's appearance, he had a good memory and all that. Kvanak continued that even though the doctor is young, not everyone is able to memorize human anatomy. So Kwana thought Simon would be useful and took him to the palace. Simon was startled by the emperor's words. Yusfir noticed Simon's obvious delight at the praise. She asked if he had heard that the emperor himself said that he was capable, so he should not be nervous. Simon shyly touched his index finger to his other index finger and thanked the Empress. He said that he is not good enough yet, but everything is ahead. He took Yusfir by the hand and said that from now on he would try his best, and that she could call him at any time. Kavana cast a jealous glance at his wife's hand, which was in the hand of the young doctor. The emperor listened with displeasure as Yusfir sincerely thanked the doctor. All the muscles in the man's body tensed. Kakan realized that he was really dissatisfied with what he saw and hastily looked away, remaining silent. The doctor, having completed the examination, left the Imperial chambers. All the necessary medications were on a small table by the bed. The emperor and his wife were sitting on the bed. Kvakan noticed that Simon is not the most talkative person and that he apparently liked Yusfir. The girl said without a second thought that this was wonderful. But the man didn't like it wonderful. Yusfir did not immediately understand his discontent. She said that the Empress should be close to her people and did not understand what was wrong. The man tensely clenched the hand that lay on his thigh. He asked Yusfir if she kept the doctor in order to get closer. The question amazed the girl, and only after this remark did she realize what exactly she had done and why her husband was dissatisfied. She assumed that Kvakan didn't like it because they were now married. The girl quickly moved closer to her husband and asked him to forgive her. The emperor noticed that he did not say this so that Yusfir would apologize. Yusfir answered him that, as she said earlier, the doctor and her brother were almost the same age, and she simply felt sorry for Simon. The princess turned on all her charm so that the man would not be angry and would understand her. She tried to find a suitable comparison to holding hands with Simon. The girl told the emperor that it was similar to how he hugged her in the carriage. Then Yusfir realized that the warmth of someone else's body helped her calm down faster. The girl told her frowning husband that she wanted to share this with Simon, but promised to be more careful in future. Kvakan held his head, as if he was perplexed that the girl really didn't understand or didn't know something. Yusfir looked at her husband questioningly. But the man did not want to answer the girl's silent question, and deftly brought the red berry to her mouth so that she would eat it without thinking. Yusfir embarrassedly covered her mouth with her palm and asked what it was. Kvakan replied that the medicine must be bitter, so he decided to give it to her. But the princess's face reflected childish delight, because after chewing it, the girl realized that it was her favorite dried raspberry. The emperor, noticing this, handed the princess a bowl of dried raspberries and said that there were a lot of them, so the princess could eat them. Yusfir happily chewed one berry after another. Kvahan, watching, thought that she looked like a rabbit. The girl asked, satisfied, if she could eat it all. Kvahan laughingly noticed that she was still chewing the one he gave her. The man approached his wife and whispered that she didn't seem to be a rabbit, but she was eating so little. Yusfir stared in fascination into the eyes of her husband, who was so close. The girl was embarrassed by such closeness of their faces, and thought that the emperor wanted to kiss her now. But the man quickly got up and told the confused Yusfir that she would soon feel better. so he ordered her to go to bed, since it was already late. Yusufir asked if Kakan would go to bed, but the man went to his desk and replied that he needed to do a little more work. The princess asked if Kakan would leave again. The man replied that how could he dare to leave his sick wife alone, and that he had the necessary documents with him. The emperor promised his wife to look after her, so she could fall asleep peacefully. The lit candles softly illuminated the entire room of the emperor and his wife. The man bent intently over his papers. The princess was lying on her side on the bed, facing her busy husband. The girl noticed to herself that the emperor really stayed, as he had promised. Yusufir thought that even if she behaves rudely, Kakan is never angry with her. But on the contrary, he is worried and worried. The girl asked herself if the point was that he wanted their relationship to become real. Yusufir thought with hope that if she managed to preserve the marriage and prevent a war, then they could become a real couple. In the girl's fantasy, the image of an older brother appeared, who sarcastically mocked her hopes, pushing a pawn on the chessboard with his finger. He told her that she had such big plans. After this, the girl woke up abruptly, as if from a nightmare. Yusufir told herself that her brother's words were true. After all, if she became useless, she would simply be thrown out. Now Kakan, so the princess believed, may be nice to her. But as soon as it turns out that she is barren, her past life will remind of itself. The girl was already shaking slightly. She repeated to herself that she should pull herself together and not tremble. The princess reproached herself for losing her vigilance, because if Kakan found out about her weakness, then nothing good awaits the princess, in her opinion. She hastily covered herself with the blanket to hide her trembling. The man noticed that the girl was fidgeting restlessly in the bed and glanced at her quickly, without letting go of the pen. The emperor watched the girl under the blanket for some time, but she soon calmed down, apparently falling asleep. Morning has come. The blue water glistened from the rays of the sun, and the Imperial ship successfully moved towards its goal. The princess woke up from a short sleep. The girl rubbed her eyes from the bright light that penetrated through the large windows into the chambers. Yusufir quickly glanced around the room and noticed that her husband was not there. The maid worriedly inquired about the empress's well-being and asked if she was still unwell. Yusufir replied that she was fine, because the rest did her good. The girl put on the dress that the emperor had given her the night before. The girl, accompanied by a concerned maid, left her cabin, because she did not want to spend the entire time on the ship in the room. Streams of wind hit Yusufir's face as she stepped onto the deck of the ship. The girl did not expect such strength. Having gotten used to the wind, the girl stared with delight in her eyes at the views that opened up to her when she stepped onto the deck. The princess had never been on a ship or seen the sea, so she was surprised by the beautiful views in front of her. The girl thought with childish delight that this is what the sea is like. The wind blew her long flowing hair. Suddenly, Her Majesty heard a loud greeting behind her, which frightened her a little as she was carried away by the sea. The girl hurriedly turned around and sweetly greeted her husband's military men in return. When Yusufir looked at the men, she immediately noticed what she expected. She felt it yesterday when she met Oslin. The Imperials were a little wary of her. If you think about it, this behavior was logical, because for them she is nothing more than just an unknown stranger. The Radon Empire was founded not so long ago, and instead of introducing a sorceress into its family, the emperor should have married one of the aristocrats of his empire in order to be able to strengthen his power. All the people wondered who Kakan would choose in the end. But then Yusufir, a princess from a small northern country, appeared. That is why the attitude of the Imperials was quite understandable and understandable to the princess. Yusufir remembered Baron Oslin's tense smile when he met them upon arrival at the port. The princess became sad. In Achaea, she was saved by her status as a guardian, but in the Empire, she is still a nobody. The girl was suddenly pulled out of her sad thoughts by the loud cry of the man who was addressing her. Simon ran out onto the deck hastily and in fear, looking for Her Majesty everywhere. Yusufir asked the doctor if something had happened, because the medicine helped her a lot and he didn't need to worry. Simon expressed concern that there was a strong wind on deck, and Her Majesty might catch a cold. The Emperor appeared behind Simon like a thundercloud, and noted that if it came to this, the doctor would have problems. Simon opened his mouth in horror and trembled due to such an unexpected appearance of the Emperor. Kakan immediately approached Yusufir and hugged her waist. The man noticed that she was not in the room, so he decided to look. The man said they should go back. Kvanak again took Yusufir in his arms without her permission. Yusufir screamed for him to let her go. The emperor told her that the ship was shaking due to the waves and she might fall. Simon breathed a sigh of relief because Kakan stopped paying attention to him. Kakan carried his wife to the chambers. Yusufir muttered to him that people were watching and that he was doing this. The emperor directly asked the girl if it bothered her that he did not observe etiquette. Yusufir answered uneasily that she was worried about his reputation, not the rules of etiquette. The man bowed his head closer to his wife's face and deliberately looked at her thoughtfully. Kakan quietly whispered into the lips of the embarrassed girl that he forgot about something. The emperor told Yusufir that he definitely should have told her this earlier. The man pressed his forehead to hers and cheerfully said that he became emperor so that he could do this. Kvanak did not like it when people had to force themselves into the framework of etiquette and obey authority, so he had already carried out several reforms in his empire. The man carefully laid the girl on the bed and continued that the people who once looked down on him had long since left, and those who remained respected their emperor too much to condemn him. Yusufir wanted to object, but moving her hand she felt that something was lying on the bed. The girl turned her head to see what it was. There were thick books on the bed. Yusufir took one of the books in her hands and stared at it in surprise. The emperor smiled at her interest. The man explained to the girl that he just thought that she would be bored sitting in the room, so he brought some books while she was sleeping. Yusufir asked in surprise what books were doing on the ship. Kakan replied that the journey was long, so he took them from the library of the Imperial Palace in advance. He asked if the girl liked him. Yusufir quickly pressed the book to herself with both hands. She quickly rattled off what she liked. The princess was worried that the emperor would take the books back. Yusufir admitted to the pleased emperor that she loved books very much, and recently there had not been a single free minute, so she could not devote any time to books. The man, inspired by his wife's reaction, invited her to read together because there were only 2 books. Of course, Yusufir agreed. The girl was reading while sitting on the bed, and the man was sitting nearby in an armchair. Yusufir noticed the improbability of what was happening. The girl ran her palm over the page of the book. In Achaea, even excerpts from these books were difficult to find, but in the Empire they were in such good condition. Yusufir heard that the Imperial Library is the largest on the continent. The girl looked at Kakan and wondered if he also liked to read. The princess thought that the better she got to know her husband, the more surprised she would be. She thought that he would be too uninterested in this, because he literally grew up on the battlefield. Yusufir carefully examined the man reading, who frowned because of something. The girl noticed this and smiled sweetly at how serious he was. Reading was her only hobby even in her previous life. The princess spent most of her time alone, but books quite successfully helped her cope with it. The experiences of other people, their sorrows and difficulties, thanks to them she forgot about her own. But now the girl was reading not far from her husband. Yusufir looked softly at Kakan as if in disbelief. Yusufir thought that it was an amazing feeling to share with someone what is dear to you. The girl hugged the book and lay down on the bed, thinking. She dreamed that it would be nice if they could live so peacefully in the Empire. The girl's eyes began to close sleepily. Kakan carefully touched the shoulder of the sleeping Yusufir. He asked her to wake up. Yusufir looked sleepily and in surprise at her husband, who was hanging over her. She asked him if something had happened. The emperor's answer surprised the girl. The man said that they had arrived in the Empire. It's time to go to the Imperial Palace. Their ship was at the pier. The Imperial carriage, accompanied by soldiers on horseback, drove through the main gates into the city, which was located near the Imperial Palace. Yusufir noticed that Kakan did not even greet his people after returning. She was worried about whether everything would be okay because of this. The princess looked out of the window from behind the curtain and saw people who were interestedly escorting their carriage. She noticed that Kakan had returned with a marriage alliance, and in the case of Achaea, all the people would have been waiting for her with trepidation all this time. The emperor explained that in a few days he would give a welcoming speech, where she would just need to be nearby to be seen. Well, then the man planned to officially introduce his wife after the grand wedding, which they would hold in the Empire. Kakan considered that the marriage in Achaea was a simple formality. Yusufir did not expect such behavior from the emperor and looked at him in surprise. Kakan said that his people would get to know Yusufira after this wedding. The man wanted the people to see their empress in all her glory. The servants respectfully greeted Her Majesty at the entrance to the Imperial Palace. The main maid introduced herself to the girl that her name was Mariana, and that from now on it would be she who would serve her. Marianne added that she would do everything in her power, even if she was not good enough for the Empress. Yusfir embarrassedly asked to take care of her. The personal maid invited the Empress to follow her to show her the palace. The Imperial Palace amazed not only with its appearance, but also with its rich interior decoration. The princess noticed that the raid on Empire was developing surprisingly quickly. Therefore, it was not surprising that Akia then lost the war. It was much easier for people to call Kakan a barbarian than to recognize his great achievements as a ruler who was able to achieve impressive progress. Yusfir stopped near the panoramic window. Something outside caught her attention. The girl asked the maid who came up what kind of building it was, pointing her finger at it. The maid said that this building had recently been built by order of the Emperor. Yusfira thought the building she saw was amazing. Marianne asked if the Empress wanted to visit him. It was this building that attracted Yusfir's attention, because it looked exactly like the palace in which she lived in Akia. But the girl rejected her maid's offer and said that for today it was enough for her to inspect the palace. Marianne asked to be allowed to escort the Empress to the main palace. The maid said that the second floor was intended for future heirs. Then the maid opened the large doors and said that behind them were the Empress's chambers. Mariana expressed the hope that Yusfir would like the chambers that had been prepared for her. At the first cursory glance, Yusfir noticed all the richness of the room that was provided to her. She froze with delight as she entered the room. The girl sincerely told the maid that the room was very beautiful. Marianne said that she assumed that the Empress would be tired after such a long journey, so she ordered a bath to be prepared for her in advance. Yusfir thanked her. The princess looked at the velvet coverlet on her bed with quiet delight. Marianne said that she would remind the maids to pay special attention to preparing the Empress's chambers. Yusfir turned around and clarified what kind of preparation her maid was talking about. The maid asked if she understood correctly that this would be their first night together in the palace. The Emperor entered the room and examined it critically. He noticed that he seemed to have left for a while. The man noted that the atmosphere in the room had changed greatly. Yusfir replied that this was the merit of the maids, because this was the first night in the palace that they would spend together. Kakan looked at the girl in confusion, and noticed that it was precisely because of the first night that Yusfir dressed like that. The girl was confused by the man's question and asked if this dress suits her. The princess was wearing a dark blue, rather open dress. Kakan cleared his throat tensely and replied that the dress suited her very well, which was the main problem. The man reminded the girl of his words that nothing would happen between them until she wanted it. That is why it was difficult for him to restrain himself every time, but he did not tell his wife this. Yusfir looked in surprise at the man who clenched his fist tightly and cleared his throat. The man went to the bed and told Yusfir that they were both tired, so he thought they should go to bed. Yusfir apologized to him and admitted that she was not very good at all this, and probably seemed stupid to him. The girl looked down embarrassedly and said that what was happening between a woman and a man was new to her. Kakan turned his head and asked her why she was apologizing, because he was not much different from her. Yusfir was greatly surprised by her husband's confession. Kakan rubbed his neck in embarrassment and admitted that Yusfir was his first. This surprised the princess even more, and she even asked again. Kakan asked why she was so surprised by his lack of experience. Yusfir answered briefly that he was the emperor. Kakan tiredly sat down on the bed, facing the girl standing nearby. The man directly asked whether the princess liked men experienced in these matters. Yusfir was shocked by such a direct question from the emperor, and she did not answer. A blush spread across her cheeks. Kakan continued that they could agree on everything, but this turns out to be a problem, because experience cannot be obtained from the air. Yusfir hastily jabbered that no, nothing like that. She was just a little surprised. The emperor said that if you think about it like that, then both of them know nothing about how the wedding night should take place. He suggested we practice. Yusfir didn't understand what he meant. Kakan took the girl's hand and pulled it towards him, saying that they could hold hands first. The man said that if Yusfir is ready to go a little further, then they can lie in the same bed together. The girl, both embarrassed and tense, stared at the man. Yusfir didn't know what to do. Yusfir pulled her palm out of Kakan's hands and admitted that then she needed to change clothes, because the dress was uncomfortable. The girl turned away because she wanted to go into the next room. Kakan correctly noted that there were buttons at the back, and she would not be able to unfasten them herself. The man got out of bed and approached the girl, who had already managed to move away a little from him. Kakan gently touched his wife's open shoulders and ran his hand to her earlobe. Yusfer immediately became embarrassed. The man asked if he could help her. His hand explored the exposed areas of the girl's back. The man carefully ran his fingers along the line of buttons on the dress. Kakan traced each button with his finger, and there were dozens of them on the princess's corset. The emperor's actions confused not only the girl. Kakan repeated his question about whether Yusfer could help. The couple sat on the edge of the bed for the man's comfort. The moonlight softly illuminated the room, giving good visibility. The man, as if enjoying it, slowly unbuttoned one button after another, exposing the princess's back. Kakan informed the princess when everything was ready. The man enjoyed the picture that appeared before his eyes. To get a better look at her back, the man carefully pulled the girl's loose hair over her shoulders. Kwana began to study the princess's back, gently running his hand along the lines of her body. Yusfer was very embarrassed by what was happening. She quietly thanked the man for his help. Kwana, without taking his eyes off his wife's back, reluctantly removed his hand from her body and answered with fascination that she had nothing to thank him for. Having changed into another dress, the princess lay in bed and burned with awkwardness. After all, usually maids always helped her, but today this responsibility has been transferred to the emperor. Suddenly, the girl heard Kakan calling her and asking if she had decided to postpone the training until later. The emperor lay on the other side of the bed and whispered that if she lay so far away, he would not be able to hold Yusfer's hand. The man extended his hand to the girl. Yusfer came to her senses and immediately hesitantly extended hers in response. The pale skin of the princess's hand was clearly visible in contrast to the tanned hand of the emperor in which it was placed. Yusfer hesitantly asked her husband if he wasn't embarrassed, because they were in the same bed and so suddenly. The girl added that when they were on the ship, the man slept in another room. Kakan looked away and replied that she was wrong, because they slept in the same room. Yusfer was surprised, and the emperor continued that she was sleeping on the bed, and he was on the chair next to her. He went to another room only when he needed to change clothes or take a bath. The princess exhaled tensely and asked him why he did it. Kakan remembered how that night the girl slept anxiously, and in her sleep repeated to her brother that she didn't want something. This worried the emperor. The man honestly admitted to his wife that he was nearby that night, because she had nightmares. He promised her that he would be there until she could sleep peacefully. These words struck the princess, and she looked into Kakan's eyes for a long time. One recognition led to another. Yusfer quietly whispered that he was really not at all what she imagined him to be. She honestly admitted to Kakan that before the wedding she was a little afraid of him, believed rumors, and in them people portrayed him as a tyrant and a cruel revolutionary. Besides, she remembered her life as a ghost. The man extended his free hand to touch the girl. Yusfer added that now everything is completely different. She admitted that she was just worried that he suddenly didn't like her. Her train of thoughts was interrupted by Kwahan's touch on her cheek. The emperor calmly said that he liked Yusfer very much, so he did not regret one bit that he married her. These words made the princess look down in embarrassment. The man gently and with trepidation ran his fingertips along the girl's neck to her collarbones. He admitted that now and in the future he only needed Yusfira. The statement shocked the girl, but she quickly told him that it was happiness, because she liked him too. The girl thought about his confession. The wicks of the candles were burning out. The incense of the candles slowly spread throughout the room. Yusfer ordered herself not to forget because in her opinion, Kakan only needs her strength. The girl repeated to herself that he liked not her, but the guardian who bore her name. Bright sunlight completely filled the entire room of the Imperial couple. The girl noticed beautiful roses in a vase near the bed. Yusfer carefully ran her finger over the flower petals. She remembered that yesterday these roses were not here. Apparently the maid brought it. Marianne bowed to the Empress and asked how her first night in the Imperial Palace was. The girl got out of bed and admitted that the fragrant herbs helped her fall asleep, and now she felt very kind. The Empress's maid respectfully said that she was glad to hear this. Mariana asked if Yusfer had any wishes. Yusfer noticed that the maid was polite and courteous, but the girl felt that her personal maid seemed to be afraid of her. Marianne stood before the Empress in a bow. Yusfer was upset, but thought that being despondent and sad was truly a waste of time. The Empress came up with a plan of action, and now knew that she had a lot of work ahead of her. Yusfer asked if they could serve her some kind of simple breakfast, since she wanted to quickly have a snack and go somewhere. Marianne asked if she could find out where the Empress wanted to go. Yusfer smiled joyfully and honestly admitted that she wanted to go to the Imperial Library. Many books stood on the shelves of the Imperial Library and attracted Yusfer to them. The girl stood in the middle of the reading room and looked at the richly furnished library. She was especially impressed by the tree that had no leaves and was completely painted white in the middle of the hall. The Empress joyfully asked the librarian where they got so many books. The man replied that the library stores all possible copies, even those that have not been officially published. He said that this library also contains poems and legends of wandering poets, which were once passed down only by word of mouth. This greatly impressed Yusfer. The girl asked if there was anything about the history of magic. The librarian waved his hand and replied that all books about magic were in a special secret section. But the man immediately added that Yusfer could use it whenever she wanted. The girl blossomed at the man's last words. Yusfer hastily asked if she could go there right now. The girl ran her fingers reverently along the spines of the books in the especially secret section. She thought that here she could find the rarest books in existence. Yusfer hoped that perhaps even some key would be found there to the secret of the keeper. The girl accidentally noticed a book that was on the top shelf and seemed to stand out from the crowd of books. Yusfer froze when she noticed this book. It was big, thick, and had a green cover. The girl did not believe that this was possible. She tremblingly took out the desired book and sat down with it at the table in the reading room. Yusfer believed that the heyday of the Age of Wizards happened several centuries ago, and therefore did not expect to find any clues in the Imperial Library. But now the girl, in disbelief and with delight, looked at the book she was holding with both hands. It was the book, The Emergence of Magic on the Northern Continent, Family History. Yusfer heard that they still actively use magic. She quickly opened the book. She hoped that it said much more about the Guardians than people knew. The book said that more than 300 years ago, horror itself invaded the lands of people. The human race and the serene bed of the Silver Forest, which were protected by God, were in mortal danger. It was then that, hearing the desperate cry of the forest for help, a representative of the Catatel family came to the call. The representative of the Catatel family vowed to protect the Silver Forest until the end of time. The great goddess Fakhar was happy, and in gratitude endowed the entire Catatel clan with a special gift. But with human flesh you cannot carry the power of God. The guardian's soul is tied to the Silver Forest and will never be able to live like other people. Yusfer exhaled in disappointment because she already knew it. But in the book it was written that there was only one girl who saved the forest and dedicated herself to the goddess Fakhar, the eternal friend of the forest elves, Genessa Catatel. Only Genissa's powers went beyond human capabilities, and her child was blessed by the forest elves of the hidden land themselves, who still miss her, even after hundreds of years. Yusfer thought about it, trying to remember what she knew about Genesse. Their history books said that she was an ordinary guardian who awakened about 300 years ago. The girl could not understand how she gave birth to a child. Also, Yusfer did not understand what eternal friend of the forest elves meant. She wondered if she could find out more about Genese if she met the wood elves. But the Empress did not know where to find the forest elves. Suddenly, someone behind called out to the thoughtful girl. Yusfer hastily rose from the table, looking at the man who had arrived. It was Kwana. The man stood near the open doors, leaning his shoulder on them. He sternly asked his wife why she was still there. The man took the girl out of the library. They were walking down the stone stairs when he asked what made her skip meals. Kwana noticed that she didn't seem to be the type who liked to faint. He said that the maids were completely confused, because the Empress had never returned to her chambers for the whole day. Yusfer sincerely asked for forgiveness to the Emperor. The girl didn't think they would be so worried. She looked at the Emperor with puppy eyes and admitted that she was reading and did not notice how so much time had passed. The man melted at this look. He, stammering, asked the girl not to look at him like that, because today he was doing so much because of her. But Kakan did not continue his thought and covered his face with his hand. Yusfer asked if the man was angry. Kakan admitted that he was not angry with her and asked for forgiveness, because in his opinion, his words had sounded rude before. Yusfer wondered what he was talking about. The man took the girl by the hand and said that he did not blame the girl at all for her desire to spend more time in the library. Kakan added that he was just worried because Yusfer is not in the best health, but she doesn't take care of herself at all. The emperor noted that he actually expected something like this to happen at least once. After all, he immediately noticed the girl's affinity for reading. Kakan carefully closed the distance between their faces. Yusufir froze, waiting for the kiss. But the man quickly stepped aside and said that he should pay more attention to this. This behavior surprised Yusufir. The girl doubtfully stared at the back of the emperor as he walked further towards the palace. She didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, the man approached the glass building and opened the door. He called the girl over to him. Yusufir quickly followed the man, and upon entering the building, a cry of admiration escaped her. The girl asked her husband what it was. They were in a spacious building with many plants, a fountain in the center, and crystal chandeliers. Kakan mockingly said that he hoped that at least the desire to see the greenhouse could push Yusufir to go outside more often. The girl sat down near one flower bed and said that it was very beautiful. The girl tenderly touched the nearest small white flowers. Yusufir was delighted. The girl told the emperor that the flowers were wonderful. Kakan approached the sitting girl and asked if she liked it. She answered in the affirmative. Yusufir noticed that she especially loves small flowers like the one she touched, because there are different ones. The emperor said that he was glad that this cheered up the girl. He greatly surprised her with this phrase. Kakan asked Yusufir to be sure to look into the greenhouse to admire the flowers, and not to forget to take care of his nutrition. The man turned away sharply and added that he had ordered flowers to be planted for Yusufir around the new building, so he hoped that she would like it here. The princess was surprised to remember the building that she had seen quite recently. Thoughts began to swirl in her head. Was it really possible that the emperor built that building and that greenhouse specifically for Yusufir? The girl couldn't understand. The thought of such special care made the girl's heart beat faster. Yusufir did not understand why Kavana continued to care about her so much. Suddenly, the girl was again attracted to the small white flower. It was a strange feeling, because she felt strange vibrations of magic here. The emperor noticed the girl's strange behavior and asked what happened. Yusufir answered in confusion that it was nothing. She stared at the flowers in bewilderment, and lied to the emperor that the flowers were so beautiful that she simply could not look away. It seemed to her that since she left Akia, magic would be completely inaccessible to her. But Yusufir had the idea that maybe she could talk to this flower. The girl decided that why not try to do this just a little and carefully. Yusufir touched the little flower again. He seemed to sparkle from the magic that was in him. The girl immediately heard a categorical no in her mind. The flower shouted no again. This deeply struck the empress because she did not expect that she would be able to talk to him. The flower, in hysterics, asked the girl why she came here and why. He shouted at her to run because she couldn't sit here. Yusufir turned sharply and hastily to Kakan, who could not understand what was happening. The girl did not understand what the flower was talking about. The emperor looked down at his wife with concern and asked what was happening. The flower continued to shout to the girl that she should leave immediately, because otherwise she would die. Yusufir stared at her husband in horror and fear. The actions that the flower spoke about took place a week ago in this greenhouse. The bright sun illuminated the entire building. The flower became an accidental witness to an interesting conversation. The man asked his interlocutor if he had thought. His interlocutor replied that his answer would not change. An elderly man, apparently an aristocrat, asked why his interlocutor was so stubborn, because this was necessary for the sake of all of them. Suddenly, his interlocutor, who was hiding his face under his hat, turned around. There was a woman hiding under the hat. She shouted in anger that she had worked so long to get this position. She had worked for so many years. The aristocrat mockingly placed his hands at his sides and answered her that working is very good. The man asked if this job was more important than her younger sister. At the mention of her sister, the woman's fists clenched tightly. The woman asked tensely how the man found out about Edith. The aristocrat replied that it did not matter, because in any case it was not such a difficult request. The man wanted the woman to simply report to him what their dear empress was doing and saying. He added that Marianne works at the palace and there cannot be any problems. The maid did not agree with him. The aristocrat had a neat mustache. The man smiled sarcastically and said that if you think about it, Marianne still came to meet him. He asked if this meant that she was interested in his proposals. Marianne turned sharply away from the man. The aristocrat continued that he believed that they could become closer and asked if she agreed. The maid was angry from powerlessness. The man called the maid by name, which gave her away to the guardian empress. The sun was sinking below the horizon. The sunset rays softly painted the town in all shades of red and orange. Mariana walked along the deserted streets. Sometimes she came across people who coughed very badly and felt unwell. The girl sadly reached her home. In the room, a young girl was lying alone on the bed. The maid sat down on the chair in front of her and apologized for coming back late. She explained that recently there had been a lot of work in the palace. Mariana began to take a small bottle out of her inner pocket. She told her sister that she should take some medicine first. The maid's young sister, Edith, lay lost in a restless sleep and suffered from a strong fever. The girl definitely didn't hear her older sister. Marianne looked with pain at the condition of her sister, who was not getting better even after medication. The man asked the maid if her sister suffered from solidiosis, and whether it really bothered her at all that her only sister had to suffer every day because of this terrible, incurable disease. The aristocrat admitted that he was very knowledgeable. He added that people in the empire are saying that this disease is spreading quickly. The man continued his monologue. He said that if the sick person cannot take magical medicine regularly, then at some point he will become rigor and die. The interlocutor's words greatly struck the maid. In their world, it was difficult to find a truly intelligent wizard, and prices for medicine were rising rapidly. They do not help all patients. The man feigned sadness and said that apparently this was so depressing for Marianne. He said that if she cooperated with them, she would get a lot of money. The man said to believe him, because commoners could not even dream of such an offer. Marianne intensely asked the man about his words about "with us." She asked if someone was standing behind him. The man smiled insidiously and replied that he could tell her about this only if she accepted his offer. He finally told her to think about it carefully. Mariana cried sitting by her sister's bed. The woman did not know what to do next. The maid wanted what was best for her sister, but she understood what could happen to her if someone found out about her tricks. Aslan handed the documents to the emperor and said that this was an estimate of the taxes that were collected in the western region for this quarter. Kakan asked to give it to him. Baron added that, in addition, there are drafts of possible reforms of the tax system. He asked the emperor to familiarize himself with them. Kavahan thanked Aslan. The emperor noticed that at this rate they would have time to prepare a plan in time for the next meeting of parliament. The meeting promised to be more tense this time than usual. Aslan defiantly stretched his tired shoulders. The men understood that conservative aristocrats would do everything to prevent tax reform. Kakan angrily threw a stack of documents onto the table. He said that if this happens, then next time he will disrupt the bureaucratic exam, which he himself insisted on. The baron supported his idea. Aslan turned his head and said that they still held to the old beliefs and believed that the aristocracy should rule the people in the empire. Kakan agreed with the baron and noted with disappointment that it was the aristocrats who overlooked and allowed the combat slave to ascend to the throne of their empire. Aslan reminded the emperor that this was not permission, but submission, and they could betray him at any moment because they had to submit. Kakan exhaled heavily and began to get up from his chair. The man said that anyway, they were old foxes. He asked the baron whether he should have treated them the same way as he did with the previous ruler. Aslan replied that Kwahan would not have done that. He argued his answer by saying that the emperor had a soul full of mercy. Kakan stood at the panoramic window, looking at the views. He asked what kind of mercy we were talking about. The man sadly admitted that he simply did not want to shed blood again. Kavahan remembered stroking his wife's tender cheek in bed the night before. He remembered how hesitantly she admitted her crush. The man was tensely thinking about what would happen if she found out about his past. Will Yusufir still tell the emperor that she likes him and call him a hero? At these thoughts, the man clenched his fist anxiously. Kakan exhaled tensely and ruffled his hair. The man lowered his hand to his neck as if the latter hurt. The empress, meanwhile, was in the greenhouse, which was immersed in sunlight. A visitor came to see her. More precisely, a visitor. The woman told the empress that she had heard that she was calling her to her. Yusufir stood up courageously and answered Mariana that everything was correct. Before this, the empress was again sitting by the flower bed. Something about the empress's appearance made the maid worry. Yusufir pretended to know nothing. She smiled kindly at the maid and admitted that she wanted to ask her something. The empress invited the maid standing nearby to take a walk with her around the greenhouse. Yusufir said she thought just standing still would be too tiring. The maid could not refuse her new empress. Yusufir noticed that it was wonderfully warm outside today. Marianne agreed with this. They walked leisurely. Yusfir said that this greenhouse was so beautiful and it took her breath away when she first walked into it. The girl touched the flowers with trepidation and said that she had never seen such flowers in her homeland. Yusfir thought that she was indeed very surprised at first. She didn't even think that she could talk to the plants of the empire. After all, her magic has weakened. Yusfir remembered the evening before and the words of the flower. Then the emperor worriedly asked her what had happened. Yusfir did not tell him about what happened and replied that it was nothing. The girl turned to the flowers again and mentally asked them what this meant, how she could die if she didn't leave. The flower said about the woman from her environment. Then he added that it was Yusfir's personal maid. He said that the maid continues to meet strange people in the greenhouse and they talked about harming Yusfir. The empress could not believe that it was about her maid Marianne. Yusfir asked if the flowers would mind if she looked at their memories of what Marianne said. The flowers agreed. They admitted that they were completely on the girl's side. The flowers glowed more intensely in Yusfir's palms. Immediately, the empress saw in her head memories of a secret meeting between Marianne and an unknown aristocrat. From the outside, the girl seemed to receive something invisible from her connection with such a small flower. Yusfir touched him very carefully. When the memories ended, the girl opened her green eyes in disappointment. Yusfir couldn't believe it. While walking with the maid, the girl reached out again to the same flowers. She was deep in her thoughts. The empress came to her senses when Marianne called her. Yusfir smiled sweetly and apologized to the maid, saying that she was just staring at the flower beds. The empress asked the maid if she liked the flowers. Marianne replied that in her opinion they were beautiful. Marianne admitted that she definitely doesn't have any aversion to flowers. The maid, in sad thoughtfulness, touched the red flower they were passing by. She remembered her sister putting it in her braid. Marianne said that something so beautiful could be so easily lost. Mariana, without realizing her words, admitted that this frightens her. An image of her sister's empty bed appeared in her head. The maid did not notice how she frankly admitted to the empress that her younger sister loved flowers much more than her. Yusfir asked the maid about her sister. Marianne replied that her sister was 10 years younger than her. Their parents died early, so the responsibility for raising her younger sister fell on her shoulders. Marianne said that they have been living outside the castle since she became a maid. The empress sympathized with her because apparently it was not easy. The maid sadly noted that she would like her sister to become a maid and work with her in the palace, but her health did not allow her. Yusfir worriedly asked what happened to the maid's sister. The maid lowered her head and answered quietly that her sister had been suffering from silidiosis for a long time, and she was trying in every way to get a cure. Suddenly the maid froze in fear. She suddenly realized to whom exactly she was pouring out her grief. Mariana immediately started babbling apologies. She said that none of this was important, but Yusfir gently stopped her with a movement of her hand. Yusfir approached the maid and enthusiastically told her that she had called precisely because she wanted to talk about Mariana's experiences in the first place. The maid was amazed at these words from the empress. Yusfir said that if you think about it, they see each other every day, but she knows nothing at all about her personal maid. The empress said soulfully that in the future Marianne would become a very close person to her. That is why Yusfir wanted to try to get to know Mariana, even if it was too late. Yusfir thought that Mariana treated her so distantly, only because in her eyes the new empress was a strange foreigner who suddenly became her mistress. The girl realized that if she had suddenly decided to talk to the maid, not knowing the reasons for her behavior, what would have happened in the end? But Yusfir interrupted herself with such pessimistic thoughts, and thought that even though the maid was cold to her, if she tried to get closer to her, this would not have happened. Yusfir vowed to herself to change in order to prevent what happened to her in her past life, but the girl still cannot get rid of her habit of distancing herself from people, instead of at least trying to get to know them. Things should be different now. She is no longer the locked-in queen who was killed by her own brother. Now she is an empress and she is responsible for millions of human lives. Yusfir took the shocked maid's hands and told her that he would help her find medicine, so she shouldn't worry. Mariana asked why the empress needed this. The empress carefully held the maid's trembling hands in hers and asked what Marianne was asking about. Yusfir said with a smile on her face that Mariana was her person. The girl decided that now she would not run away from people. Marianne was speechless at the empress's words. The maid could not believe that she herself wanted to help her. Yusfir swore to herself to do everything possible that was within her power. The emperor and baron looked in surprise at the man who burst into the office. Kakan asked his wife how she got to this part of the castle, because it was far away. Yusufir lightheartedly reported that last time he himself had come a long way to find her. Kakan pushed his chair away from the table with a creak and stood up. Yusufir asked if she had disturbed the men. Aslan sternly tried to inform the Empress that they actually still had business to do. But Kavanak pushed the indignant Baron back and told Yusufira that she had not interfered at all. Kwana approached his wife and said that they had just finished. The girl smiled joyfully because it meant that she was on time. Aslan watched the pair and noted doomedly that the two boots were paired. Yusufir shyly asked her husband if he would like to share a meal with her. The emperor could not resist his wife's charm and immediately became embarrassed. The table was richly decorated. Many plates with different dishes were prepared for the imperial meal. Yusufir was embarrassed. She assumed that Kakan was surprised by her sudden proposal. The girl admitted that she was ready for the man to refuse her. Kakan calmly assured her that it was not worth it, and besides, she had successfully chosen the time for the meal. The emperor admitted that he was glad that Yusufir personally invited him to dinner. Yusufir mentally asked herself why her face was so red. The girl stammered and told the man that the chef had worked so hard. The girl looked around the entire long table, which was filled with all sorts of goodies, and noted that today, apparently, he had to try even harder for the reason that they were eating together. Kakan incomprehensibly asked the girl what she meant by even more, because it seemed to him that everything was as usual. Yusufir was surprised. The girl immediately quickly bit her tongue and covered her mouth with her palm to be safe. Yusufir realized that she had almost told her husband that she always ate in the library. The man noticed that something was wrong with his interlocutor and asked if she was sure that everything was fine. The emperor exhaled tiredly and touched his forehead with his fingers, as if the man had run out of strength and had a headache. Yusufir looked away because she didn't know what to answer. Kwahan noted that they were lucky to meet today, but if something happens to her, he won't be able to immediately find out about it unless she herself tells him. The girl had to think about how she could tell her husband about everything. It was worth telling then about the secret of the Silver Forest and about solidiosis. She was brought out of her reverie by the voice of her husband, who said that from now on they would have a meal together. Yusufir asked how this is possible because he is so busy. Kakan cut a cake that stood nearby and said that he did not want Yusufir to faint. He handed a piece of cake to Yusufira and asked her to try it, because she liked raspberries. Kakan asked casually if something had happened. Yusufir asked what he was talking about, breaking off a piece of cake. The man admired his wife eating and replied that she herself spoke about how busy he was, but still asked him to give her time. It seemed to the man that she wanted to tell him something important. The girl's hand with the fork froze. She slammed her fork down on the table and gathered her strength. In one breath, Yusufir said that her maid told her something. The empress frankly told her husband about the story that she heard from her maid, but she kept silent about what the flowers told her. Yusufir asked the emperor if he knew Mariana. The man answered in the affirmative because he invited her to the palace. He said that Mariana spent a long time undergoing an internship at a specialized educational institution for servants, and it was thanks to her outstanding skills and good manners that Marianne received the position of chief maid. Kwahan knew that she regularly left the castle, and he understood that there was a reason for this, but he did not think that everything was so serious. The man leaned back heavily in his chair and said that he believed that because of this whole situation, the maid could not concentrate on her work at all. Yusufir agreed with her husband and asked if they could move her sister as a maid to her. The girl thought that it would be better for all of them if Marianne could take care of her sister and not leave for a long time. The emperor asked what she thought about the Imperial hospital. He said that it just so happened that Simon plans to begin studying solidiosis in the near future together with the best doctors of the empire. The hospital has all the newest and highest quality equipment. The man noticed that Marianne would not have to worry because the hospital was not far from the palace. Yusufir didn't believe it right away and asked if it was true. This surprised the emperor. He smiled condescendingly and replied that the empress only had to wish, and the empire would do everything to please her. Yusufir froze after her husband's words and sighed enthusiastically, as if she had come up with something. She asked herself if the empire would really do everything to please her. The man noticed the changes in the girl and looked at her questioningly. Yusufir came to her senses and thanked the emperor. The girl admitted that she was afraid to imagine what would have happened to Marianne without the help of the emperor. The emperor honestly answered the girl that he only followed her advice. The man extended his hand and touched the girl's fingers that were lying on the table nearby. Kakan soulfully told the girl that she should thank herself. Yusufir froze in embarrassment at the man's words. His look at the girl made her blush. She hid her eyes and said uncertainly that the emperor's consent and support helped a lot, so both were worthy of gratitude. Kakan smiled at the girl's conclusions and confirmed her words. He noticed her embarrassment. Yusufir continued to quietly eat the cake. The girl wondered why only she felt awkward. The empress decided that she should quickly finish her meal and leave. The man looked at her carefully but noticed something, so he called out. Yusufir turned to him questioningly. Kakan told her that she had something on her face. The girl tried to find out where exactly, but every time it was too far. Kakan took pity and stood up from his chair. The man approached her and independently wiped the cream from the cake from the girl's cheek. Kakan stroked the girl's cheek and whispered to her that there was something there. Yusufir embarrassedly touched her cheek with her palm and gasped in surprise. She was embarrassed by her husband's proximity and touches. The girl looked into the man's eyes and thanked him stammeringly. Her voice sounded like her throat was dry. The man did not break their eye contact. He still stood bowed next to his wife. The girl looked confusedly into her husband's eyes, and as if spellbound could not look away from him. She wondered what was happening to her. The man also succumbed to the magic of the moment and called the girl by name in a velvety voice. Kakan leaned lower and apparently wanted to offer the girl a kiss, but they were interrupted. Aslan opened the door to the dining room with a bang. The Baron, with papers in his hands, loudly informed his emperor that he urgently needed to check one document. Taking his eyes off the papers, Aslan noticed the emperor and empress burning with embarrassment. The man immediately realized that he had burst in at the wrong time. The emperor wanted to speak to Aslan, but decided that it didn't matter anymore and asked what document he was talking about. The girl covered her reddened face with her palms and thought that if it wasn't her imagination, then the emperor wanted to kiss her. In Yusufir's memory, a moment surfaced that she noticed with her eyes downcast. The man was tightly gripping the armrest of the chair, as if he was restraining himself. Kakan definitely wanted to kiss his wife. The man distracted the girl from her thoughts by saying that he was glad to see her. The emperor, with papers in his hands, was about to leave. He said farewell, to which the girl responded belatedly. The empress asked herself in confusion what she should do next. Yusufir noticed that lately she had been experiencing very strange feelings around the emperor. The maid Mariana stood in front of the empress and asked in shock whether it was true that her sister would be admitted to the Imperial hospital. Yusufir sat at the table in front of the maid and answered her question in the affirmative. The empress stood up from the table and told Marianne that she had already talked about this with His Majesty. She said that soon a place would be prepared for the maid's sister, and she would be able to transport her to the palace. Doubt showed on the maid's face. She muttered that only officials and members of the ruling dynasty had the right to be patients in the Imperial hospital, as she could then. Yusufir came closer to her subordinate and asked what she was talking about now. Marianne sadly lowered her head and quietly answered the empress that she was a commoner. The maid believed that she was just lucky to get a job in the palace by the grace of the emperor. Marianne noticed that if they were in another country, she would not even dare to look up at the hem of her empress. Yusufir replied reassuringly to the maid that in the Radon Empire people are judged by their skills, not by rank. The girl took Marianne's hands and said that all this time she had done her job better than anyone else. She asked the maid not to say that she did not deserve all this. In addition, Yusufir asked how she could become a good empress if she did not take care of those who were dear to her, and at the same time adhere to principles. Mariana stared at the kind empress in shock. The girl thought about something that struck her. Yusufir told the maid that she did not want to neglect her, so she expressed her hope that Marianne would accept such an offer. Marianne broke eye contact and tilted her head. She wanted to pull her hands out of the empress's hands. The maid remembered how she sat on the bed next to her sick sister and cried, holding her hand. Mariana, after her thoughts, decided on something and wanted to tell it to Yusufir. Suddenly, the maid's bitter tears rolled down her face and fell onto her trembling hands. Marianne sobbed without stopping. She whispered the words that how could she do something to such a person. The maid suddenly fell to her knees and bowed low to the empress. Mariana begged Yusufir to forgive her. Yusufir pretended that she did not understand the reason for the maid's hysteria. Mariana honestly admitted that one person was secretly contacting her. The empress listened to the maid with bated breath. Marianne admitted that this man said that he would help get medicine if she gave him information about the Empress. The maid, through tears, said that she deserved to be punished for hesitating. Yusfir sat down and hugged the maid's shoulders. She asked the crying woman what kind of punishment she was talking about, because the life of the maid's sister depended on this medicine. The Empress admitted that, on the contrary, she greatly admired the fact that Marianne did not agree immediately. She lifted the maid from her knees. But the woman blamed herself and wanted to go down again. Yusfir asked her to calm down. She repeated that everything was fine. The girl asked if Marianne could tell who made this proposal to her. Mariana wiped the tears from her face, gradually calming down. She was ready to reveal the identity of the person who contacted her. The maid said that he was a fairly well-known civil servant in the Empire. Marianne told the Empress that this man was Baron Edwin. Yusfir asked the name again. She had heard it for the first time. The girl asked the maid why he needed information about her. The maid said she was not sure, but warned that Baron Edwin was a very slippery and cunning man. She said that he once showed great disrespect for the former emperor and since then lived in hiding, fearing retribution. He supported the revolution only to change his position.